It was morning at the royal estate of the Welton family. The boy sat up in his luxurious bed, quietly saying that he had had that dream again. This boy was the eldest son of the Welton family and its rightful heir, Jamie Welton. But this boy was not only him. In him lived the soul of a magician who, many years ago, bled to death on a magic circle. Raising his head, the magician said that even the 12 gods could not defeat him. All they could do was seal him. He shouted to the sky that they could seal him away, but he would come back for them when he was reborn. And when that happens, their bright lights will be drowned in pitch darkness, and he will not let them die so easily. He will torture them until they beg him to kill them. The gods told Diablo Voltaire that they would eagerly await this, but in the meantime he would be condemned to eternal suffering. Thus, the 12 gods sealed him away, but after a huge amount of time, a crack appeared in their barrier, thanks to which Diablo was able to escape, and eventually he stood up to Jaime. As soon as he opened his eyes, he saw his current parents admiring their baby. Diablo was puzzled to discover that he had become a mere baby and could not speak properly. Later, he realized that he had become an aristocrat, dearly loved by his parents, and about 9 years had passed since then. Jamie sighed and said that today was going to be another boring day. An elderly woman entered his room with a bright smile, calling the young gentleman. The boy turned around and wished his nanny good morning. The woman asked the boy what he was doing so early in the morning, to which he replied that he was admiring the morning sky. It was so beautiful today. The nanny remarked with admiration that their young master was so wonderful, but Jamie did not show the same enthusiasm. The woman told the boy that everyone was waiting for him, so she would help him change, and Jamie agreed, beaming with joy. Having dressed, the boy followed the nanny into the dining room. Before entering the hall, he sighed again, thinking about what was about to start again. The rest of the family was already seated at the table and happily wished Jamie good morning. Flashing a perfect smile, the boy wished them good morning too. Sitting down next to his little sister, Jamie immediately heard his mother say how cute their children were. Jamie's mother was the only daughter of the noble Bell family, Ciri Bell Welton. The boy's father turned out to be the head of the royal family, Welton, and one of the 5 sword masters of the kingdom, Argento Welton. Although this man has a truly impressive status, he is madly obsessed with his wife and children. Sarah Welton, Jamie's younger sister, extended her fork toward her brother, offering him a piece of food. Having accepted the treat, the boy stroked his sister's hair, thanking her not for the treat, and in response, he handed her on his fork what she loved. Turning away, Jamie thought that this was indeed very tiring, and the smile fell from his face. After breakfast, he returned to his room, collapsed on his bed, and thought that he still couldn't get used to how nice his current family could be. The boy started to talk about how he liked the mansion because it had a library, and that even though he had to endure several years of not being able to speak, he liked that there was something to do here. He thought that this was why he was tired, and at that moment a bat with one eye and a round body sat on his head. As Jamie grabbed the bat, he thought that it wasn't such a bad thing, as his reincarnation had given him a new ability. Squeezing the bat in his hands, causing it to burst, he thought that those 12 stupid gods probably still existed. They latched onto their believers, faiths, and hopes like damn parasites. The outline of an eye appeared again from the black liquid on the boy's palm. Diablo was now capable of little. And in this era, there was little information about dark magic, so time was definitely on his side. Squeezing what had been the bat again, Jamie thought that he would definitely become stronger and kill these gods who looked down on him. Thoughts of revenge were interrupted by the nanny, who informed the young gentleman that it was time to read books with his mistress. Worried that the woman had seen anything, Jamie gave his brightest smile. As he walked towards the door, he thought that every time he had to play the sweet boy, he wanted to be sealed again. In one of the living rooms, Ciri and Sarah were already waiting for him. Jamie dropped to his mother's lap and asked her with a smile what book she would read to them today. Once again, unable to contain her outburst of tenderness, the woman hugged her son, telling him how sweet he was. She took out a book and said that today she would read them the book The Great Mushhines and asked them if they liked the title. When everyone sat down on the sofa, Ciri began to read. A few hours later, she finished reading, finding that Hines lived happily ever after. The woman asked the children if they liked the book. With his eyes shining, Jamie replied that he wanted to be a cool magician like Hines, to which his mother replied that he was very smart, so she was sure he would succeed. She happily noted that he had already defeated all 3 magic teachers. Jamie could not believe that she had drawn such a conclusion from this. Stroking her son on the head, Ciri told him that his father had invited the most powerful magician especially for him. Jamie thought it didn't sound like a joke and replied that he had such a wonderful dad. When the boy got up from the sofa, Ciri asked him if he was going to the library, and he said that he was. Holding out her arms for a hug, the woman told her son not to linger there, as he should spend time outdoors. Jamie, with nothing else to do, walked up to his mother and pulled her into a tight hug. Hugging her son back, Sirei happily said that he didn't have to go anywhere, but could continue playing with his mommy. Still, having escaped his mother's embrace, Jamie was able to reach the library. He closed the book in disappointment, saying that he thought there would be something interesting in it about the use of mana, but in the end he learned nothing new. Getting up from his chair, he noticed that it was already lunchtime and he was so tired of eating with them 3 times a day. While he was walking to the dining room, the boy met someone on the way. An old man in a white cloak and with long gray hair and beard noticed that, as expected of the Welton family, they were using a rare artifact as a decoration in front of the entrance to the dining hall. Jamie couldn't figure out who was standing in front of him, but what he did notice was that this man had a lot of mana, that it was literally flowing out of him like a storm. Frowning, he thought that this was a mage, at least level 7, but what was he doing here? Had he teleported? The stranger noticed how the boy tensed up as he thought about the possibility that this mage might be a thief. But he was too calm to be a thief, who had broken into the house of one of the swordmasters. Finally, Jamie asked the stranger who he was. He asked him how he got here, and the magician noticed that this boy was also a tiger, like his father, and his level was definitely above average. The boy thought that first he should have kneeled, but it was too late. He was infuriated by this calm behavior of this magician, and his look, which seemed to be assessing. Lowering 2 fingers, which immediately glowed with mana, Jamie thought about what he would show him, what would happen, to lower his guard. The stranger was surprised to discover that this boy had so much mana at 9 years old, and he was becoming increasingly curious. Having released his power, the man thought that he was curious about how strong he was. This only made Jamie even more angry that this old man was testing him. He couldn't believe that someone was testing him, Diablo Voltaire, who in his past life had managed to destroy almost all the gods. With a wave of his hand, Jamie sent his magical attack forward. However, everything did not go as the boy imagined. Frowning, he noticed that he hadn't done anything to this old man at all. The stranger began to smile even wider, not believing that this mud actually belonged to a 9-year-old. He joyfully exclaimed that it was his turn now and also released a magical attack. Jamie thought that this old man was really good, but he couldn't help but notice that this attack wasn't coming at him, which meant he didn't have to dodge. The man was surprised that the boy didn't even bat an eye. Suddenly, Jamie's father appeared in front of him, deflecting the magical attack with his sword. Argino told the mage that he had gone too far. Turning around, he asked his son if he was okay, and he answered that he was. Naturally bursting into tears, Jamie replied that he was fine. Noticing that his child was crying, Argino called this magician, Marcus Linmel, and Marcus noticed that this boy behaved more modestly in front of his father. The magician laughed and remarked that this was a surprise. It was quite funny. He told the count that he even envied him. Argento couldn't understand what was happening to this man. He attacked a child and now he was suddenly laughing. The swordmaster and the mage moved to the living room, where tea was poured for them. The count indignantly told Marcus that this was his son, and also the heir of the Welton family. Calmly sipping his tea, the magician replied that he knew it. In a sepulchral voice, the man asked again. Marcus asked him to calm down. Because of his aura, he felt uneasy. The magician asked the man how much he knew about his son. Argento asked him what he meant. Marcus asked him with a smile if he knew that his son was a genius. The swordmaster replied that he knew, which is why he entrusted his son to him, and he went and attacked him. Marcus replied that he apparently didn't know anything, so he pretended not to hear his words. The head of the family asked him what he was talking about again. Marcus Linmel is considered the most powerful 8th-class master among all living mages. Argento thought that someone like Marcus would hardly recognize his son. Could it be that Jamie was not as good as he thought? But then the magician told the man that he was definitely not thinking about that. He told him that he could not take his son as a student, since he simply could not handle him, to which the swordmaster asked who could handle him if not an 8th-level mage. Marcus told Argento that his son was able to read all of his actions, which puzzled him even more. The swordmaster thought that this was simply impossible, no matter how smart Jamie was. The magician continued, saying that even that boy realized that his spell would fly past him. He said he was even surprised that the child didn't flinch for even a split second. He began to enthusiastically say that this was not all. He had already become a 3rd-class mage only thanks to self-training. And if you close your eyes to the limits of his body, then his level is even higher than 4. Marcus said that this child is not even a genius, but just a monster. He does not need any teacher. He just needs support, and then he will continue to improve himself. and perhaps even become a legendary 9th-class mage. Argento was taken aback by this statement. He couldn't believe his ears. Getting up from the sofa, the magician apologized to the man for attacking his son. He smiled and said that great discoveries await magic. Not even magic, but the whole world. As he disappeared into space, he said it would definitely be fun. The Count leaned back in his chair, still trying to comprehend what he had just heard. Later in the evening, Jamie returned to his room and leaned tiredly against the door. He said irritably that somehow his mother found out what the old man had done, and so she pounced on him with concern, trying to find out whether he was okay or not. The boy said that he had wasted so much time, but he was finally able to see the real spell, which made him incredibly happy. What pleased him even more was that the spell was actually quite good. Everything about it was top-notch. But it was not Marcus who impressed him more, but his father, Count Argento Welton. With a smile, Jamie said that he, of course, knew that he was so strong, but to this extent, so he definitely deserved to be his father. Suddenly, a voice was heard from behind the boy. Marcus, sitting on his bed, asked him what he was laughing at. When the boy turned to him, he asked him if he had been so immersed in his thoughts that he had not even noticed him. With a loud scream of surprise, Jamie fell to the floor and asked the old man what he was doing there. Marcus laughed, saying he didn't expect to be so easily scared. Still sitting on the floor, Jamie asked the mage how he got there. Coming closer to the boy, the magician honestly answered that he had teleported. The boy thought that he knew that this old man was unusual, but for him to just teleport into his room like that. Marcus grinned and asked the young mage why he was not as humble with him as he was with his father. Getting to his feet, Jamie shouted in irritation that family and a stranger were not the same thing, to which the man remarked that he was so funny. Marcus quietly said that he was so sorry that he could be a little stronger. Turning away from the man, the boy thought about how this strange man was looking at him like that, even though they had only just met. The mage raised his hand, and a book magically appeared in his palm, which Jamie immediately recognized as magical memoirs. When the book flew through the air into his hands, the boy asked the man why he gave it to him. Marcus replied that the magic he used was completely outdated, so he gave him a book about new magic. Jamie thought with irritation that this was so humiliating, but Marcus took the boy's expression as one of being very touched by the gift. Leaning over, he told the boy that the book contained many of his signature spells and that he would be the first to read it. This intrigued Jamie, and he immediately opened the book to see how the magic of this time differed from what he knew. He was brought out of his book by a man's voice, who told him that he had very high hopes for him. He told him with a smile that he wondered what he would be like the next time they saw each other. And having finished his sentence, the great magician disappeared into thin air. Jamie smiled and told him that he would become much stronger than he could ever imagine. The magician passes all the magic that exists in this world through himself, and then absorbs it into his heart. This is the most effective way to learn how to control your mana, but there is a problem, and that is the limitation of the mana that can be passed. Jamie opened the book and began to read, and almost immediately his head began to spin with the complexity of the information. Closing the book, he thought that it was too difficult, because he needed to feel every particle of mana so that it could pass through the skin and body. Falling onto the bed, he thought that he would have to try really hard to do this. The boy wearily wondered who was even capable of such a thing, and he said that the old method still couldn't be surpassed. He had already found two downsides, but still, inside Jamie was Diablo Voltaire, so he had to deal with that too. Opening the book again, the boy said with a smile that this old man had opened his eyes. He said enthusiastically that he would definitely read every page of this precious book. Raising his hand, he said that he could definitely use some help to get started. The black energy of the tour gathered together, and that same bat with one eye appeared. The baby sat on his master's shoulder, and Jamie asked him to spray some mana here. Obeying his master's request, Chernish immediately flew into the air, mana starting to pour out from his wings. The first drawback of this mana absorption technique was that the absorption of these large particles had a limit, and all proportions had to be strictly observed. But for Jamie, this was not a problem because he had Blackie. Blackie, with whom Diablo had a contract, can disperse the required amount of mana, so there will be no problems with proportions. The first minus has already been resolved, and the second one will definitely not be a bigger problem. The second disadvantage for Jamie was the size of his current body. In other words, he had a limit to the amount of mana his body could absorb, which meant that he simply needed to distribute the mana to different parts of the body and then all the limitations would be removed. In the morning, Argento and the nanny stood quietly at the door to Jamie's room. They watched the boy sitting on the bed, meditating, and the woman quietly called out to the Count. The Count did not take his eyes off his son. He could not believe that mana was swirling around his body. The swordmaster, of course, knew that Marcus had given his son something. But how could his boy deal with his mother in just one night? This made the man think about how much hidden potential his sweet Jamie had. The Count told the nanny to leave him like that for now, but since she didn't know when he would leave the room, she should leave someone on duty at the door. The woman replied that she would look after him personally. The Count walked away, and the nanny remained standing and watching, worried. Argento wondered if it was the influence of his wife's family that meant his son would become a mage instead of a swordsman. But even so, his son's abilities were beyond what he could have expected. Smiling, he proudly said that his son could become a 9th-grade magician. A few hours later, Jamie jumped up in bed screaming with glee that he had succeeded. At first, it was really difficult to control the old one because its movements were unpredictable. But after a few tries, he managed to do it. However, at the moment, level 4 is the limit of Jamie's powers. The boy sighed and said that it was bad because he was so close to reaching 5th grade. Blackie landed on his owner's head, squeaked questioningly. Jamie answered that at the moment he had no desire to improve his body, because he already understood that it was too weak. Chernish rolled onto the boy's shoulder, answering him. The young magician said that for now, he just had to be patient. Those bastards weren't going anywhere anyway. With a wave of his hand, Jamie cast a spell to make Blackie invisible. He told his pet that he wanted to meet his father, so he needed to hide his mana because he didn't think it would be okay if he suddenly found out about him. Walking towards the door, Jamie smiled and noted that he could barely feel his presence from here. He proudly said that this is what one should expect from his pet. He is sure that his father will definitely not notice him. Having dealt with this, the young magician went to his father. Meanwhile, a guest was sitting in the living room with Argento. The swordmaster asked the guest what brought him here, since he was usually always busy, to which he replied that he simply wanted to greet him. The man said that he knew that there had never been any problems with religion in the Hazelands, and so he wanted to thank the Fine for giving the Janus cult a chance. Argento replied that he thought it would be a good idea to help his people, so he decided to give it a chance. A cult member asked him what he meant. The Count replied that since he always strives for the best, he decided to make the genome cult the greatest in his lands, since now many support it. Frowning slightly, the man realized that this was the Count's way of telling him that his people were not the people of some gods, and he thought that he should take him more seriously. The swordmaster asked the guest why they didn't end this conversation now, since he must be so busy. The man replied that he appreciated his concern. The Count wished the guest a good journey, and the cult member responded by saying that the great genius would bless him. As soon as the man left the living room, the polite smile fell from Argento's face. Jamie, who was standing behind the wall, silently listened as the steps of the man he did not know faded away. Looking out from behind the column, he thought hard about what he knew to be true. On the stranger's cloak, he noticed a crescent moon with a yellow sphere, and this aura also seemed familiar to him. Jamie thought with irritation at how dare this Janus do something in the place where he lives. The boy could not understand why his father suddenly decided to make his lands religious, and most importantly, why of all the religions, he chose the cult of Janus. Jamie couldn't allow this. This faith had no place on his lands, but due to certain circumstances that limited his freedom of action, he was left with only one option. Since this religion was officially sanctioned by the Count, the only way to get rid of it was to force the Count to drive them out with his own hands. To do this, Jamie needed to meet his father and begin an investigation. The boy walked into the living room where his father was sitting and happily told him about his successes. Argento asked his son with a smile if this meant he had completed everything. With the same joyful smile, Jamie replied that everything worked out for him. Seeing the smile on his son's face, the man said that he must really like magic, to which his son agreed. Noticing the thoughtful expression on his father's face, the boy asked his father what was wrong. Argento replied that he was thinking about how he would grow up as a normal child. The man did not continue his thought, thinking that his son had too many hidden talents. Living the life of a genius is not such an easy thing. When a child shows his talent, everyone begins to admire him, but when they get tired of him, those same people begin to mock him. Finally, the swordmaster told his son that if he did not like practicing magic, then he could leave this business. But if he had already made his final decision, then he would not interfere with him, but would only help as much as he could. Laughing, Jamie replied that he would never give up magic. This made Argento calm down a little. However, he wondered if a 9-year-old child could really communicate with that much mana. He could already feel the magic emanating from his son's body, and the more of it there was, the more he didn't feel it. But then the man caught himself thinking about how mana could be stored somewhere other than the heart. Without understanding anything, Argento asked his son if he had really learned everything from the materials that Marcus Linmel had given him yesterday. In response, the boy nodded, omitting the fact that he had also perfected some techniques. This made the man scared and wonder what Marcus had done. The father and son continued to talk until the former could not understand how much his boy had learned in one day. Now he had no doubt that this child could become a legendary 9th grade mage, laughed at himself and thought that compared to his son, he was just a nobody. Jamie's unexpected laughter made him ask his father what was wrong. The man answered him that he laughed because he was especially proud of him today. Jamie laughed happily in response. When the man touched his son's head, he frowned, wanting it to end quickly. Suddenly, to the boy's surprise, the swordmaster pointed to Chernish, who was sitting on his master's head, and asked his son whether he had summoned him himself. Jamie asked his father in confusion if he could really see him. The boy, flustered, couldn't understand how this had happened, since he had definitely cast invisibility. To prove that he saw it, Arjuna described this strange creature. Jamie, upset, said that he had given Blackie the bat shape and wanted to ask him because he thought he would be quite surprised to learn that he had made it himself. However, the Count rushed to hug his son, pleasantly surprised that he did it himself. After some time, Jamie was able to break free from his father's embrace. He wearily thought about why they loved him so much. Night had already fallen, but people were still walking the streets. Jamie pulled his hood over his head and called out to Blackie. Flashing bright sparks, Chernish, flapping his wings, landed on his owner's head. The boy told his pet that he needed to find out why these nobodies had decided to settle on his territory. Blackie took the form of wings, allowing Jamie to fly himself, and he flew out of the estate window. Somewhere in the courtyards, 2 men were sitting and talking. One of them, who was pumped up, asked his comrade what the boss had said, to which he replied that he had said to do everything exactly according to plan, otherwise they would die if they didn't report. Philip, an employee of the criminal organization Livel, sighed and said that he had no idea what they were getting themselves into. A member of the same criminal organization, Jans, responded by shouting and asking his comrade whether he didn't understand that the boss would make any sacrifice to achieve his own goals. He continued to shout that Hayes was a land where even Count Welton himself would allow such an organization to coexist peacefully with everyone, as long as they did not cross a certain line. But human trafficking crossed that line completely. Philip understood this, and therefore quietly replied that if they were lucky, they would be able to quietly escape and no one would understand them. Jans loudly objected that he was the only one who thought that way. They would all be caught sooner or later anyway. He asked his comrade what he thought would happen if Count Welton, who simply adored his children, found out that they were using other children to trade on his lands. The man himself answered that if this day comes, then all criminal organizations will disappear from this city forever. Philip said that the boss was apparently confident that they wouldn't be caught. Jans still didn't believe it. Then his comrade told him that Han Ni said that the Count's people could help them. In response to this, the muscular man noted that this Han Ni was ready to do anything. His comrade asked him in a resigned tone whether he would rather run away or hand them over to the police. Following the underworld rule that members of the underworld were not allowed to reveal their plans of action to third parties, the men decided to escape. Sitting down on the ground, Jans asked his friend about his plan, since they had definitely searched every corner to find them. Philip replied that they would have to try very hard. It was still better to die during the escape, and not in front of him. The muscular man noted that they had no other way to survive anyway, and his comrade silently agreed. As it turned out, someone was standing around the corner, eavesdropping on the conversation between these 2 members of the criminal organization. Jamie stood listening to Jans talk about how he was outraged by this human trafficking. The conversation immediately died down when the men noticed someone coming out from around the corner. Standing at attention, Jans asked the stranger who he was. Jamie asked them with a sly smile if they really wanted to know who he was. Clenching his fist, the muscular man replied that if he didn't want to talk, he could die. And without a second's hesitation, he rushed into the attack with his fists. Philip hastened to follow his comrade and took out his daggers. However, the criminal's blows did not reach the boy, as he managed to disappear somewhere in a split second. The men, not understanding anything, began to look around, trying to find this stranger. But they immediately froze in fear when they heard a sepulchral voice asking them what they, the greenhorns, were chatting about here. Unable to move, they watched as the stranger sank to the ground. Raising his hand to cast the spell, Jamie said with a smile that he wanted to listen too. The purple lightning of the spell quickly descended and penetrated the heads of the criminals. After some time, kneeling, the men told the stranger in the cloak everything they knew. After hearing all this, Jamie thought that people like these guys' boss were the ones his father despised the most. He couldn't understand what was going on in the heads of these idiots. Did they really want to be killed? Jamie was irritated that now not only the gods were twisting people around as they pleased, but people were starting to do the same to people. But still, the boy tried to understand what this boss was thinking when he entrusted these guys with such a job. As Jamie got up from the box, he felt that this definitely did not bode well. He used the spell on the men again, and magic circles glowed on his palms. The boy ordered them. The pillars, they went to the count's estate and told him everything. Philip and Jans could only agree. Like living dolls, they slowly rose from the ground. Jamie remarked that the morning was definitely going to be stormy. Without further ado, Philip and Jans went to carry out their mission and headed towards the count's mansion. Jamie called for Blackie again, deciding it was time for them to return. The boy looked after the men, and behind his back the black wings spread out again. But before he could even take off, suddenly one of the men flew into the wall. Philip also flew after his comrade, his stomach pierced by some kind of magic. Behind him, Jamie heard loud laughter and the cry of "those thick-headed bastards," which made him jump in surprise. Turning around, the boy saw 4 people, one of them telling his boss that he was being too loud and the police must already be on their way to get them. Sighing tiredly, the young magician quietly asked where this psychopath had come from. He raised his palm, purple sparks glowing at his fingertips. Jamie asked how they dared to touch the people who carried out his orders. The boy raised his hand up, using even more powerful magic, and a large magic circle began to glow behind him. Waving towards the corpses of Jens and Philip, he told them that he forbade them to die until they had completed his task. Hanna found the corpses of the men and the stranger in the cloak and shouted to his subordinates to bring these idiots and this guy in the cloak to him. When the criminals didn't start to follow the order after a second, Han-Ni shouted at them to hurry up. Finally, the criminals began to drag their half-dead former comrades to the boss. Tears rolled down Philip's cheeks as he weakly asked for help. Jamie watched silently as Jens and Philip's limp bodies were dragged away. His eyes flashed with anger and a curse flew from his lips towards Han-Ni. But Han-Ni only laughed loudly in response and released magic into the boy's head. He didn't stop at one blow and continued to leave holes in Jamie's body. The man, drooling, screamed about how great it was and how much he liked it. But even this state of the boy did not stop him, and he shouted that he wanted to hear his screams before he died. And Han-Ni summoned an explosion, breaking the stone covering and turning the man into coal. One of the 6 asked the boss what bad thing Finn had done to him. Han-Ni replied irritably that he was sure he was attacking such a small brat. But then a child's voice in his ear asked him if this was all he was capable of. The man immediately turned around and saw a figure in a cloak, who asked in a sepulchral voice if it was fun. Smiling a manic grin, Jamie asked if it was fun killing his comrade. Han-Ni's eyes widened in fear as he tried to figure out who this little brat was and how this little brat was still alive. He also couldn't understand what that ominous aura was emanating from his body. In the blink of an eye, Jamie was there and in a terrifying voice told the man that he was taking on too much, being only a 3rd-class mage. Unable to bear the insult, Han-Ni gritted his teeth and cursed, shouting that he would kill him. Waving his staff, he summoned a 3rd-grade spell, Buster, which couldn't even compare to a 5th-grade magic explosion. But this should have been enough to incinerate this small body to ashes and thus leave no trace. There was a bright, fiery explosion, but then the world plunged into darkness. A child's voice was heard, telling the man that he would tell him one thing about how the human mind works. Jamie said that people feel completely helpless when faced with those who are many times stronger than them, and he enjoys manipulating those who are much weaker than him. The world returned to its colors and immediately Han-Ni's body fell limply to the ground. The 6 men couldn't believe that their boss had been defeated so easily. They screamed in fear that there was a monster in front of them and decided to run away. Jamie said in a calm voice that they should consider themselves lucky, and he raised his small hand. He clenched his fist hard, casting the destruction spell. Immediately in the alley, dark purple lightning flashed and desperate cries of people were heard. Han-Ni's body and ordered him, his slave, to answer all his questions. Saliva flowed from the man's mouth and, having lost all willpower, he could only agree with the will of the master. In a broken voice, Han-Ni began to talk about his boss and the sale of small children. Jamie thought with disappointment that he had heard this before, and his father could find out about it from those 2 idiots. Trying to decide what to do with this body, the boy noticed that this body would not last long, even though he had stopped death. Since he is only a 3rd class, he could turn him into an undead. But even if he did, because of his soul, he would begin to decompose very quickly. It might have looked okay on the battlefield, but in some peaceful place, it would have definitely attracted attention. Jamie smiled and decided he would have to use another method after all. Since Han-Ni was a 3rd-class mage, his mana should be sufficient. The boy stretched his hand forward and began to absorb mana from the barely living man. Within a few minutes, all of the man's mana had been absorbed by Jamie, which he was quite pleased with. Due to human characteristics, there were many different impurities in the sand, but he was still lucky to absorb such a large amount of mana. Looking at Jens and Philip, he asked them what he should do with them. Coming closer, the boy concluded that although he had given them some of his mana, he did not think that they would be able to hold out in this state for long. From the dark energy that swirled around Jamie, Blackie reappeared. The boy stretched out his hand and began to cast a spell over the men, for he could not allow them to die until they had done their work. It had been a long time since Diablo had last used necromancy, the magic that could revive dead bodies. Such bodies were no longer considered living bodies, and this magic was completely contrary to the laws of nature. Jamie began to read the spell. The dead, creatures that are both alive and dead at the same time. From this moment on, as my faithful servants, you will live even though you are already dead. Halfway through the process, Jamie turned to Chernish and asked him for help. With a few wing beats, Blackie rose higher, ready to use his powers. Jamie continued to chant the spell. Give up your lives and rise, immortal bodies await you. You must refuse death. The veins on the men's faces bulged as purple sparks swirled around them. The magician noticed with irritation that one of them was still in the afterlife. But the spell was still successfully used and began to work. Dark energy began to swirl around the men's bodies. This dark energy began to seep into the bodies of Jens and Philip. Finally, to complete his spell, Jamie called out to the sinners with a cry. A few seconds later, Jens and Philip told their master in unison that they were awaiting his orders. Jamie looked around at his new subordinates with confusion. He couldn't tell if it was all over or not. What bothered him was that black smoke was still swirling around the men. Having landed on his owner's head, Chernish began to squeak excitedly. Jamie started asking him what went wrong. The pet rolled into the boy's arms and he reassured him that he had done everything perfectly. Without a twinge of conscience, he began to stretch it, saying that he was the only one who did something wrong, although it was difficult for him to admit it. He was not usually attached to his past achievements, but he was still very upset that all his previous slaves had disappeared. Since Jamie could not use such slaves, he decided to get rid of them. The problem was that if they continued to release this black smoke, they would not be able to carry out Genesis' orders, let alone walk freely down the street. Chernish bit his owner on the cheek, as if forcing him to stop. Jamie responded by screaming indignantly, asking his pet how he dared to do this. Sitting on Jens's head, Blackie spread his wings, which began to absorb the black smoke. Jamie was surprised that his pet was capable of such a thing. Within a few minutes, both slaves were clear of the black smoke, and the boy could now use them. Chernish, from such a large amount of smoke, grew to an enormous size, which clearly caused him discomfort. Jamie petted his pet, praising him for his excellent work. Once the problem was solved, the boy decided to move on to giving his slaves names. The one who used to be Jens became Hazard and Philip became Rise. Now the resurrection of the men was definitely complete. Their eyes took on a meaningful expression and Azard and Rise began to look around, not understanding anything. Realizing that his slaves had no idea what was going on, Jamie decided to give them time to recover. Azard looked at the boy in front of him and respectfully asked him if he would bring him back to life. Jamie said that's exactly it. The frightened man tried to understand who this boy was. He looked to be about 9-10 years old, and also why a huge ominous aura was emanating from him. He was just like a character from a book Jans read when he was little. This boy is a sinister creature that will not be in the world for long, a creature that challenges the world itself. Noticing the new slave's gaze, Jamie asked him with a smirk what was wrong. He asked him if he really looked like a demon lord in his eyes. Philip, now Rise, was also unable to move from fear, but soon collected his thoughts. He shouted at the boy that he had no idea who he was, but in his eyes he certainly didn't look human. Jamie was surprised to find that Rise was acting too aggressively, not seeming to understand that it was his master standing in front of him now. He decided that this meant that there were some flaws in his spell. However, this did not mean that he was going to turn a blind eye to such behavior. Swinging his hand downwards, the mage abruptly pressed Rise's face to the ground, breaking the stone covering. Jamie sternly told him that he was only asking him this once, but if he dared to raise his voice at him again, he would not get away with it. Still pinned to the ground, the man replied in fear that he understood everything. The boy turned to Azard in the same stern tone, saying that it also concerned him, and he immediately said that he understood everything. This is precisely the subordination of souls, and it does not matter whether these souls desire it or not. But as long as they are bound by contract, these souls belong to the master, and that is the essence of dark magic. Having finished with this question, Jamie informed them with a smile that he was not a demon lord. Azard politely asked the owner who he was. Throwing off his hood, revealing a sweet, childish face, the boy with a bright smile replied that he was a very ordinary dark magician. Putting his hood back on, he told his slaves with a smile that he had a job for them. They would need to monitor the Church of Genis and gather information related to it. The men bowed respectfully, accepting the order. The boy continued by saying that they still needed to bring in anyone who might know about the human trafficking. He needed them to be the one to tell his father everything instead of them. For several long seconds, Azard and Rise stood, bowed low. Rise looked up cautiously and noticed that their master had already disappeared. The departure of their master made the men straighten up and breathe a sigh of relief. They immediately set out to carry out their task, because they cannot disobey their master. The whole way, Chernish did not stop squealing indignantly at Jamie. The boy, trying to calm him down, told him that everything would be fine. His new slaves were too scared to disobey his orders. Thanks to them, his father will be able to solve the problem of the slave trade himself. Unable to calm down, the pet began to bite the boy's cheek again, and the magician irritably said that he could not allow them to continue trading people in these lands because they would soon become his. Having decided to call it a day, Jamie was about to order Chernish to lift him into the air. But then suddenly someone hit the boy hard in the back. The one who crashed fell to the ground. He could not fully comprehend that he had suddenly crashed into someone. Turning around, Jamie noticed that this someone was a child, and he stopped his indignation in surprise. The child who had crashed into him shouted irritably to the other one that he was also a child. Only after remembering this did Jamie awkwardly turn away. Blackie had already stuck to his master's hair to hide its noticeable color. The boy told the other one, who was still sitting on the ground, that this time he would let him go, but in the future he should be more careful. Wanting to get away, Jamie quickly turned and walked away. The boy who had bumped into him whispered irritably that this arrogant idiot thought he was already an adult, although he didn't even have a single gray hair on his head. As if hearing the boy's words, Chernish began to pull his owner back, practically separating himself from his hair. Forcing Jamie to stop, the pet spread through his hair again. The magician couldn't understand what had happened and looked in confusion at the boy, who was looking at him defiantly. Jamie realized that Blackie did it because the kid made a joke about his hair color. Disappointed, he mentally asked his pet how he dared to climb on his master's head, and who taught him manners anyway. But the magician still looked at the boy and in a terrifying tone told him to watch his words if he didn't want to die. Frightened, the boy ran away, apologizing at every step. Chernish squealed joyfully, grateful to his owner. All these events made Jamie realize that he needed to return home as quickly as possible. Upon returning home, Chernish sat guiltily on the floor, looking away. Jamie, sitting on the bed, sternly asked him if he even understood what he had done, and threatened that he would not get off so easily again if he did something like that. The pet took the threat seriously, but his owner still couldn't understand where he could have learned such a thing. The young magician fell tiredly onto the bed. He had used more strength today than he had originally thought. Now he had many more days, so his easy and carefree life came to an end. Besides, soon one of the gods would appear in his life and on his territory, and it was the god that Jamie hated the most. Clenching his fist, the boy stubbornly thought that this Genis could only try to do something. He didn't care how many followers he had, because he could easily destroy them all. Meanwhile, Jans, now Azard, reached his former comrade and began asking him where his older brother was, while the man was surprised that he was alive. The man muttered that Han Ni said he would personally kill these two, so why were they still alive? He couldn't imagine that he would be defeated by these idiots who couldn't even use mana. Losing his patience, Azard slammed his hand on the wall next to Pip's head. In a threatening tone, he told him that he would not repeat it twice, and Pip could not understand where Jans got such strength from. But he was even more worried about where the other guys were, because they would have caused such a scandal here if they found out that Jans had returned. Realizing that they had already been dealt with, the man tried to figure out what to do, and first answered Azard that he did not know where his older brother had gone. Rise entered the room and asked his former comrade if he was sure of his words. In response to Pip's surprise, he asked again, but in a more threatening tone. The man, shaking with fear, replied that he could ask anyone and would receive the same answer. Frowning, Rise thought that he needed to find the boss, because he might know something about Genis. The resurrected man's eyes glowed red as he asked Pip where he thought the boss was. The man realized that he needed to give them a normal answer, otherwise they would cut off his head. He started talking about how since the boss liked girls and liked to drink, they could check out all the bars in the area. Azard turned to his brother and said that it was a good idea, and Rise agreed with him. Pip, hearing this, calmed down and decided that he was safe. But the next moment he saw the fist of the former Jans flying towards him. Azard glanced at the unconscious man and noted that they could take him as the witness the gentleman had requested. But then he asked where they could hide it. Kicking the body, Rise replied that they could just lock him in the basement of his house. Agreeing with this, Azard threw Pip over his shoulder and followed his brother. The boy who had bumped into Jamie then made it to the building, where he discovered that everyone inside was dead. He couldn't understand what had happened here. He thought he would be beaten again because he had not fulfilled his quota from yesterday, but it seemed that now there would be no one who could do it, and the boy decided to run away before others suspected anything. The next day, Jamie woke up after a long, sweet sleep. He sighed resignedly, realizing that he would not be able to avoid meeting them. Before entering the dining room, the boy decided to call Chernish away so that he would not catch the eye of his father. Opening the doors to the room, Jamie asked his parents how they slept. Argento greeted his son with a smile, and Sarah happily replied to her brother that she had slept well. Not noticing his mother at the table, the boy asked where she was. But before he could finish his question, Sirey pounced on him. Laughing, the boy asked his mother where she was hiding. He didn't even notice. But in fact, he knew from the very beginning that she was standing behind the door. After patting her son on the head, Sirey asked him if he was scared, to which he replied that everything became okay when he realized it was his mother. The woman couldn't stop admiring how well-behaved her son was. After trying to calm her down, Jamie said it was time for them to have breakfast. But no one listened to him, and his sister joined in the tight embrace. Finally, after several long minutes, everyone sat down at the table. But still, Sirey could not contain her love for children and rushed to hug her daughter. Jamie looked at Sarah and thought that he would like to squeeze her cheeks because they are always so soft on children. Catching himself thinking that he was thinking about the wrong thing, the boy hit his forehead on the table. Having finished eating, Argento remarked that tomorrow everything would begin. Holding his sister in his arms, Jamie asked what would happen tomorrow. The surprised swordmaster asked his wife if she hadn't told them. Sirey, frowning, exclaimed that she had forgotten, and all because her son had made her worry. The magician immediately realized that she was referring to the technique he had used back then. Knowing her character, one can understand that she must have been very worried. Jamie looked away guiltily and apologized to his mother. The woman replied that she understood that nothing would happen to him anyway, but he couldn't continue to exhaust himself like this. She said dramatically that she might faint somewhere because she would be so sad. The boy said that he would not do that again. Having regained her cheerful mood, the hostess of the house said that they would all go to the ball tomorrow. This will be a huge ball, organized by Count Simon and Count Welton, and almost all the nobility living in the north of the empire will be present at the ball. Sirey spoke with anticipation about how happy she was because they would be going out into society for the first time. For Jamie, this meant that his precious free time would soon be over. Night fell and Jamie donned his dark cloak again. Having called Chernish, he stepped on the windowsill to wipe and visit his blockheads. Azard immediately noticed the appearance of the gentleman, interrupting his conversation with Rise. Removing his hood, Jamie asked them if they had done everything he had asked them to do. Rise began to apologize for the fact that they had not yet been able to find out anything about the Genis cult, since it had been created not so long ago. Without getting angry, the boy asked them about another assignment. Instead of answering, the men took the gentleman to Pip, whose hands were tied and whose mouth was gagged. Noticing the color of the boy's hair, the man immediately realized that the Welton family had taken care of them. Rise told the master that it was one of the members of Livel, and he also knew that Han Ni was supposed to kill them, so he was not a simple pawn. Azard continued, saying that the man claims to know nothing. Deciding to interrogate Pip, Jamie ordered his mouth to be untied. As soon as the man was able to speak, he immediately began to beg them not to kill him, because he really didn't know anything. But if they let him go, he would get them any information. Suddenly, Pip's whole body began to shake, and he couldn't understand what was going on. The boy told him that he had no reason to kill him. He just wanted him to carry out his orders, and the man could feel an endless amount of terrifying power. Bursting into tears, Member Livel agreed to anything, just so he wouldn't be killed. After shutting the screamer up, Jamie said he would only have to do one thing. Using a spell, he commanded him to head straight to the Count's estate and tell him everything his organization was doing. Unable to control his actions, Pip rose to his feet. Under the gaze of Azard and Rise, the man left the room. Jamie told his slaves not to worry about him. It was unlikely that Livel would catch him. At least his father would be the first to deal with him. The boy ordered them to leave the city and hide somewhere, and the men immediately agreed. The magician asked if they didn't want to know why they were doing this. In unison, the men bowed and replied that the master's orders were law and they could not disobey. Looking at the owner, Rice said that he understood why he told them to do this, which made Jamie realize that he understood the situation they were in. Most likely, the father will destroy Livel. During his destruction, it will not be useful for him to know about the existence of these two. Turning around, Jamie told them that he would be gone for a few days, so they needed to keep quiet until he returned. In the silence of the night city, he walked away to take off somewhere unnoticed. But then Rise ran out into the street and loudly called for his master. Surprised by this behavior, the boy asked him what had happened. The man continued shouting, asking him what they had eventually become. He already knew that they were dead, and he knows that this cannot be fixed in any way, but he does not want to return to his past life, but he wanted to know what kind of creature he is. Jamie asked him what exactly he wanted to know, in response to which Rise noted that they had become much stronger than they were before. He asked if this meant they had become undead of your rank. The boy only laughed in response, causing the man to apologize for his stupid question. Jamie said with a smile that it was just really funny, because usually people ask if they really became undead. He had never seen anyone take it as easy as they did. Rise awkwardly thanked the owner for the compliment when he said they were very interesting. Jamie thought about how everyone usually refused to accept that they had become monsters and lost their humanity. But these guys are the complete opposite of those people. The boy decided that he had found himself very good servants. Finally, he answered that they became simple zombies. He just kept their appearances for them. And after they became zombies, they became stronger than ordinary people. Rise seemed disappointed that they had become mere zombies. With a smile, the boy told his slaves that everything depended only on them. Perhaps they would someday become top-level zombies. These words brought hope into the hearts of men. Having finished this, Jamie walked away again, his servants saying goodbye to him. Chernish quietly squeaked something to his owner, and he replied that he didn't find them pathetic, but rather interesting. They reminded him of that guy from the past. After walking into the alley, Jamie, with the help of Chernish, took off into the sky and flew home. That night, the Welton household was in turmoil. One of the members of Livel, a huge criminal organization, decided to betray his association. The Earl had to stay behind to take care of some business, so only 3 of the Welton family went to Reagan, the largest city located in the east. Sitting in the boat, Jamie thought that he could get there himself using teleportation. He was already much stronger than before. His magic had made incredible progress. It was radically different from what it was in his time. But the problem was that he had no idea how many years had passed since his death. The events that take place after Diablo's death are described in history books. So the army of demons led by the demon lord attacked the people. But after that, for the last hundreds of years, there have been no wars. The boy thought that so much time had passed, and these stupid gods still couldn't unite. But this way, it would be even better. It would be easier to deal with each of them, even though a large number of people would die. The dark energy that began to ooze from Jamie's body began to disturb Sarah's sweet sleep. Noticing this, the magician immediately calmed down and used a different magic. This magic had a calming effect on Sarah, softening her sleep. A few hours later, the carriage entered the city. Jamie looked out the window and noticed how beautiful it was. Sirey told her son that this was the most advanced city in the kingdom. It was impossible to find a place through which more money passes than through Regan. Jamie was convinced that those who said that Seldom was one of the richest kingdoms only thanks to Regan were not lying. After a few more minutes of driving through the city, the carriage entered the estate grounds. The boy told his mother that he wanted to see Count Simon so much that his heart would jump out of his chest. Once again unable to contain her surge of tenderness, Sirey hugged her son tightly, making him regret his words. Having calmed down, she asked him if he admired Uncle Simon so much because he also wanted to become a magician. Tired of his mother's hugs, Jamie quietly agreed. Sirey told her son that Count Simon, being the same age as his father, was already a 7th-class mage, and that he, along with his father, was one of the 2 leaders of the Eastern Council of Nobility of the Kingdom, and he was also the Lord of Regan. His magic is similar to the Red Lotus, so he was nicknamed the Red Lotus Mage, and it is said that with one spell he can kill 1,000 people at once. Jamie asked her what kind of man this Earl was. Sirey thought about how best to describe him. Finally, she said that his hair was as red as blood. The boy didn't care about all these facts, but the power with which he could take thousands of lives was already more interesting. He was curious about how strong he was, and he was really looking forward to meeting him. The conversation between Jamie and Marcus Linmel was a bit useless because it was short, but with Count Simon, things might turn out differently. When the carriage stopped, Sirey was the first to get out of the carriage, telling the children to carefully follow her out. Without contradicting his mother, Jamie quickly followed her out. A servant of the estate approached the woman and asked her if she was the wife of Count Welton, to which she agreed. And then the servant led the guests to their chambers. The man led them to huge, luxurious chambers telling them that they could safely address their personal butler with their wishes. Sirey noticed that Count Simon was so caring. The servant told the young master that he could use the room, which made the boy happy, as he didn't even want to imagine what it would be like to share a room with his parents. Sirey told her children to come back to her when they finished unpacking their things. A few minutes later, the maids were already helping the countess tidy herself up. Jamie looked at his mother and admired not her beauty. Smiling, she asked him if he also thought she was beautiful. She exclaimed joyfully that she was so pleased to hear it. She rushed to hug him, but the maids asked her not to control herself, otherwise she would ruin her image. With tears in her eyes, Siri asked if she couldn't even hug her boy once, to which they replied that her dress might get wrinkled. Little Sarah was also ready, but she was unhappy with her appearance. Both Siri and Jamie couldn't help but find this girl simply charming. Smiling brightly, the girl asked her older brother if she was cute. Leaning towards his sister, the boy told her that she was very sweet. He understood that she was very uncomfortable and therefore asked her to be patient until the end of the holiday. Once Jamie had also changed his outfit, the family headed to the ballroom. The room was already crowded with people and there was a loud hum of conversation. Looking around, Jamie wondered if ballrooms had always been so luxurious. Sitting down at the table, he decided to ask his mother about it, to which she replied that Count Simon loved luxury. He was especially surprised when he met him in person. The countess immediately began to be noticed, and people approached her with conversations and compliments. Jamie remarked dismissively that everyone was trying so hard to suck up to his family, and he had met plenty of people like that in the past. In times that are not even mentioned in history, exactly the same fools flattered these damn gods. It was disgusting for the boy, but fortunately his mother knew how to deal with such characters. Suddenly a voice rang out throughout the hall, immediately attracting everyone's attention. There was a man standing in the middle of the hall. He thanked everyone who came to Count Simon's ball, introducing himself as Rival Banner. He said that he was a member of the administrative bodies of the city of Regan. In response to this, applause swept throughout the hall. Rival announced that the ball would soon begin and asked everyone to take their seats. He also said that Count Simon and his entire family would arrive very soon. As soon as the Count appeared in the hall, Jamie immediately felt enormous power. The man greeted everyone in a calm but confident voice. He said he hoped everyone would enjoy the event. Jamie was stunned by the fact that this Count was almost on the same level as Marcus Linmel, and maybe even stronger. The boy chuckled at the fact that Count Simon had exceeded his expectations. Approaching the Welton family table, the head of the family, Simon greeted the Countess, saying that she looked better than last year. Rising to curtsy, Sirey smiled and said that there was no need to remember that, and that she was glad that he was also in good health. The Earl asked Countess Welton if Earl Welton would be there today, to which she replied that he would be there later in the evening due to some problems. Without asking any more questions, the man turned his gaze to the children. Sirey immediately introduced her son. She also introduced her daughter and asked the children to greet the Count. Jamie bowed politely, introducing himself again, and Sarah, still unfamiliar with etiquette, offered a childish hello. Countess Simon noticed that these children were so beautiful. Sirey was quick to point out that her children were also very smart. Noticing the Count's gaze on him, Jamie realized that he was looking at every corner of his body. Taking this as a challenge, the boy decided to show himself by releasing some mana. Count Simon was very impressed by the boy's strength and asked him again for his name. He told him with a smile that they would definitely talk to him later. Having finished with the greetings, the Count and his family moved on. Jamie, once again convinced that Count Simon exceeded all his expectations, could not wait for their next conversation. The man walked around the room, greeting other guests at the ball. Count Simon's son became interested in this Jamie Welton, especially because his father paid attention to him. Jamie asked his mother when his father would arrive, to which she replied that it would be closer to midnight. When they sat down at the table, Count Simon's son asked him what he thought of Count Welton's son, to which he asked him what he was so interested in the 10-year-old child. The boy grinned and said that he might be young now, but in the future he would become the head of the Welton family, and they were the same age, so why not get to know each other? Without answering, Count Simon remembered that he had heard rumors that his eldest son was showing leadership qualities among the noble children. He immediately realized that this was his way of gaining his recognition, and he considered it stupid, but still decided to play along a little. The man told his son that this boy was wise beyond his years, and with a joyful smile the boy asked him if he could tell him anything else. Instead of answering, the Count simply asked the servant to serve him an aperitif. Countess Simon placed her hand on her son's palm and told him that he should befriend Jamie, his longtime ally. Smiling, the boy replied that he would definitely do it, and she need not worry. Pleased with this answer, the Countess smiled back at her son. As soon as his mother turned away to ask for an aperitif as well, the Count's son immediately stopped smiling, thinking that he hadn't even thought of getting along with this bastard. He decided that this Jamie Welton would definitely crawl on his knees before him. In his dreams, Count Simon praised him for this, saying that this was what was to be expected from his son. Indulging in his fantasies, the eldest son, Welton, began to chuckle quietly. The boy's younger brother noticed this and only grinned, as if he had something in mind. Getting up from the table, Sire ordered her son to make sure to make friends with everyone here. Waving to his mother, who fluttered off into the crowd, he thought that he would rather spend this time alone with his mind. He sincerely hoped that he could find a quiet place for privacy in this big house. After leaving the mansion, Jamie began to stroll through the garden. Under his breath, he said that Count Simon was good not only at magic, but he was surprised that he was able to reach such a high level. Suddenly, someone from behind him asked him who he was talking to. Without thinking twice, Jamie immediately turned around and, using magic, pulled out a sparkling lightning bolt. He placed the tip of this lightning bolt on the neck of the one who called out to him, and it turned out to be a little girl. Having assessed who stood in front of him, the boy immediately calmed down and put away his weapon. Tears returned to the girl's eyes and she screamed, asking if it was possible to attack so suddenly. Feeling no guilt, Jamie asked her if that meant sneaking up on her was okay, and the girl hissed that it was a very rude thing to do to a lady. The boy asked her who she was and how she managed to sneak up. Delighted that Jamie was interested in her, the little aristocrat said that she didn't really want to talk after his actions. The magician was not in the mood because of this girl's speech and the very fact that she had snuck up on him. He used a spell, and something already flew at the feet of the stranger. The young magician explained that it was a magic bullet, level 2 magic. He told the girl that if the non-magical protection was not strong enough, it would pass right through, so he was sure that for a little girl like her, it would be fatal. The stranger froze in shock, unable to believe all of this. Jamie raised a threatening finger and asked her if she still didn't want to introduce herself. The girl screamed in fear that she really wanted to introduce herself. She nervously exclaimed that her name was Ash Valley. Ash continued loudly, saying that she was the eldest daughter of Viscount Vale and a spirit summoner. Summoner is a term used to describe mages who have made contracts with mysterious nature spirits. There are not many summoners on the continent. They are considered outstanding mages and can lay claim to the title of Baron. Jamie couldn't believe that this little brat was actually a summoner, but he still thought that with the help of the wind spirit, she could very well have silently sneaked up on him. It was surprising for the boy that she was the same age as him, but already a summoner, usually, to unite with nature, they begin to study at the age of 10. But this girl is apparently a genius, so when she just begins to train, she will perhaps be able to make a contract with the king. After introducing herself, Ash asked the boy who he was to use such dangerous magic. A little confused, Jamie thought that this girl didn't like to lose, since she was trying to question him after revealing her identity. The Viscount's daughter asked the same question more insistently. Jamie did introduce himself, saying he was Jamie Welton, heir to the Earl of Welton. Ash was surprised by this because the Vale family are black vassals of Count Welton. Meanwhile, Argento stood over Pip, who was writhing in pain. He said that his gang was annoying, but he didn't touch them, because sometimes their gang was even useful. Pip raised his head with difficulty, choking on his own blood. Grabbing the man's chin, the Count asked them if they had decided to repay him by trafficking in people. He told the man that either a madman or someone who was tired of living could have taken on this. Looking down menacingly, the swordmaster decided that the second option suited him, and he simply had to fulfill his wish. Tears streamed from Pip's eyes as he weakly begged for mercy. Turning around, Argento indifferently ordered his subordinates to pull this guy out tomorrow. The subordinates immediately accepted the order, and the Count left the room. He ordered his other subordinates to immediately prepare a cart for him, and after a short time, the swordmaster went to his family. With a frozen face, Pip walked where Count Welton's subordinates led him, and the other participants followed behind him. Meanwhile, someone in a black cloak sat on a tree and watched all this. Taking out the blue ball, he reported that the gang had let them down, and they needed to prepare a plan B. Jamie continued walking through the park, Ash walking a few steps behind. Turning around abruptly, the boy irritably asked her why she was following him. He told her that if her father was not her father's vassal, it didn't mean anything. Tears welled up in the girl's eyes as she tried to say something, but the Count's son interrupted her, telling her to stop talking so strangely. Indignant, he shouted that he was coming back, but Ash immediately grabbed his wrist. Surprisingly, the girl's grip was strong, and Jamie was unable to break free. Even more irritated, he asked her why she was pestering him. Ash exclaimed that she had met someone her own age for the first time and wanted to be friends with him. Hearing this, the Count's son froze in shock. He couldn't even imagine that this could be the reason. The magician couldn't understand why this girl suddenly needed a friend. He sighed and reasoned that perhaps for children of a different age, friends were important. The girl looked sadly at Jamie, but he still thought that it was not his problem. Turning around, he told her to find someone else because he didn't need friends. Ash, feeling helpless, shouted after the boy that he was a pest. Jamie walked further into the garden alone, thinking that this girl didn't seem to understand that friendship, like any relationship, was not rational. Stopping, he thought that he needed to get rid of such feelings immediately, and then his past self wouldn't have to experience something like this. Jamie thought with irritation that this girl had brought back some unpleasant memories. The boy was pulled out of his memories by a loud voice calling his name. As it turned out, it was the son of Count Simon, and standing behind him were two sons of other aristocrats. Noticing the red hair of the one who called him, Jamie immediately realized that he was the son of Count Simon. The magician asked the boy what he called him. One of the choristers asked what this disrespectful tone towards their brother was. The second, drooling, exclaimed that he should have recognized this man immediately, because it was Alf himself. And already in unison, the boys exclaimed that in front of him was the eldest son and heir of the family of Count Simon, while Alf smiled contentedly. Annoyed by how noisy it had become, Jamie smirked and cast a silent spell. Immediately, the boys discovered that no sound came out of their mouths. The smile immediately disappeared from Alf's face as his friends began to panic and try to say something. Startled, he asked Jamie if he had cast a silencing spell on them. With a joyful smile, the boy replied that he was better than these monkeys since he knew about such a spell. Earl Simon's son shouted at him, asking him if he realized that he was older than him, to which Earl Welton's son said that they had better not go into details and get straight to the point, while he did the same to him. The boy waved his finger lightly, causing the other to flinch. Smiling awkwardly, Alf began to talk about how he wasn't there to fight. He just wanted to chat a little, and praised him for being able to use such a spell. Jamie replied that he had heard enough of his chatter, so he had better go his own way. Surprised by such treatment, Alf asked the boy if he really didn't know who he was. When Jamie replied that he knew, the boy said that since he was the son of the Earl of Welton, they should have no problems communicating. Alf spread his arms and said that he didn't want him to get the wrong idea. They treated him that way because he was rude. Jamie just thought that if he hadn't shown his skills, they would have tried to forcefully befriend him. Alf told Jamie that since horses would be the core of the nobility in the future, he thought it would be a good idea to make friends now. Despite Alf's beating around the bush, Jamie realized he wanted to subdue him. Finally, he replied that he didn't want it. He didn't care about him and his ideas, so he didn't even want to listen. Count Simon's son could not believe that he had been refused, and he exclaimed that this freak was getting on his nerves. Waving his hand to the side, he summoned his staff, shouting that it would dissolve his weak magic into dust, and he will have no choice but to serve him. Jamie just looked at the boy silently, without even flinching. He smirked and noted that he had planned to resort to brute force all along. Alf replied that it was true. At first, he decided to change the plan of action when he used his magic, but still, he would act in his own style. The Earl of Welton's son was disgusted by the boy's duplicity at such a young age. He asked him if he really thought that adults allowed him to do whatever he wanted. He is sure that he will get into trouble if he does something to it. Alf confidently said that there was nothing to worry about. No one would see them as long as he had this. And he took out a sparkling sphere from the pocket of his jacket. Using the artifact, Alf summoned a large magic circle. Jamie immediately recognized it as a magical illusion artifact, and the other boy said that he really was a magician since he knew what it was. He confidently shouted that in any case he would soon be begging him for mercy. Looking at his sixes, he broke the spell of silence. As soon as the spell lost its power, the boys breathed a sigh of relief. They screamed that they thought they would die because of this spell, and that he would not get away with it even if he was from the Welton family. Jamie didn't listen to these upstarts, but only looked at the dome formed by the artifact. Turning his attention back to the annoying kids, he said with a smile that this was getting interesting. Alf responded to this by saying that he must not understand the situation he was in. In a sepulchral voice, Jamie activated the suffering spell. Blood began to flow from all the holes on the boys' faces. The magician told them that it would be better if they did not remove the dome. Otherwise, everyone would see them drowning in hellish torment. Unable to contain such pain, the boys fell to the ground, uttering heart-rending screams. Eventually, the dome disappeared and Jamie quickly left. The Alpha Sixes began asking him for help. Alf himself was not in the best condition. He was in such pain that he couldn't even hold back the urge to vomit. His entire body began to shake as he tried to figure out why he lacked strength and why this bastard was a rank 4. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he thought about how he was just a poor second rank. How did it all turn out like this? He knew that Jamie was born into a family of knights, so where did he get such magical powers? The only thought that came into his head was that it was all a matter of talent, which Alf himself did not possess. Slowly rising to his feet, he muttered under his breath that he would not forgive this. His face twisted into a furious grimace as he decided that he absolutely had to destroy such a talent, so that he would never be able to use magic again. Having come to their senses, Alf and his companions headed back to the estate. The boys asked their leader if he was sure that this was the right decision, since stealing a magical instrument is such a thing. Alf, however, was full of determination and sharply ordered them to shut up and follow him. But then someone called him, calling him Big Brother, which made all three boys flinch. Lennon, Alpha's younger brother, came around the corner with a soft smile, and his older brother asked him what he was doing there. Lennon replied that his older brother did not make him happy with such words. Taking out some kind of glowing object, he said that he could not stand aside when his older brother was offended. Alf immediately recognized the object and could not understand where his younger brother got something so dangerous. Handing it to his older brother, the boy said that it was not important. What was more important was that he should get this upstart Welton. Alf agreed. A predatory smile appeared on his face. It really was more important to destroy this little freak. It was already approaching midnight, and the carriage with Count Welton was approaching the gates of the estate. Count Simon came out to meet his comrade in person. He extended his hand and greeted him with a smile, saying that they had not seen each other for a long time. Laughing, Argento noticed that the Count was greeting him in person. The impossible had happened. After shaking Lichter's hand, Argento asked him how he was doing, to which he replied that everything was fine and suggested that they come in already. They went into one of the rooms where they sat down at a table. Count Welton asked the other if the event had been a success, to which he replied that it had been as usual. And Lichter told his friend that he had met his son. The swordmaster asked the magician what he thought of him. Count Simon laughed and remarked that, judging by his quick response, he doted on his children, to which he replied that he lived for them. The magician said that he was even envious. Argento asked sympathetically whether nothing had really changed. Changing the subject, Lichter said that Jamie surprised him, or rather, completely amazed him. The swordmaster closed his eyes wearily as his interlocutor beat around the bush. Smiling again, he asked him if he wanted to say that he thought he was talented. Lichter grinned and replied that the word talent was not enough in this case. This boy is the best. He has never seen anyone like him. Perhaps in the history of all mankind there has never been a more talented person. Argento noticed that Marcus Linmel said the same thing, which made Count Simon ask again. Rubbing his hands, the swordmaster said that he too knew of his son's talent when he was younger, but he never thought of it as anything special. That's why he asked Marcus for a favor, because if someone is so talented in magic, then he should become a magician. Both he and the world need it. Lichter exclaimed that the boy was very lucky to have such a strong teacher. Argino said that Marcus refused, to which Count Simon replied that this was understandable, because this child was an unrivaled genius. He would be able to achieve everything on his own, even become a legendary 9th rank mage. He was envious that the boy was born more talented than him. But, on the other hand, he was very interested to see what he could achieve with such strength. These words made the swordmaster wary, and he asked what he meant. Lichter said that they, people, are very weak, and although they were able to build a great civilization, it was great only by their standards. And compared to dragons, high elves, and so on, their magic is just a breeze against the backdrop of a hurricane. He said that it was only thanks to the swordmasters that they could still fight for anything in this world. Lichter asked with a smile what would happen if a 9th grade mage were suddenly born. And he himself answered that then even dragons, masters of magic, would not stand nearby. Count Simon said that his heart longs for people to become the rulers of this world. Argento, however, noted that this was too arrogant. Lichter answered him that even if this was so, then everything was fine. He himself knew it, because their history had been forgotten, wiped off the face of the earth. Forgotten history is a secret that was known only to a few people on the entire continent. About 10,000 years ago, history disappeared due to some incident. Because of the extraterrestrial perfect beings who decided to protect people from those secrets, Count Simon dreams of people gaining such power that would prevent us from being kept in knots. And all this is done with the aim of preventing a repetition of the history of human civilization, as well as its sudden disappearance. On this tense note, the Count said goodbye to rest, for the hour was already late. Jamie had already been lying in his bed for a long time and was sleeping peacefully. Argento looked at his sleeping son and wondered if such expectations towards his son would be justified. As a father with such a talented child, he was worried. And all because, for him, his son was not a genius, but a sweet, beloved son. Argento promised himself that he would grow up to the fullest, so the only thing he asked for is that he grow up to be a fair person. The next day, the celebration continued, and the aristocrats gathered again in the ballroom. Jamie sat in a chair and thought about what had bothered his father last night, because he couldn't afford to use mind control out of simple curiosity, and his abilities didn't allow him to do so yet. Ash walked up to the boy and called his name loudly and clearly. Jamie said wearily that he thought they had already discussed everything yesterday, and that he had nothing to do with her. The girl calmly replied that, however, she had business with him. With the same joyful smile, the girl called her little sister. The magician thought with irritation that the number of annoying people was increasing. Getting up from his chair, he declared that he was leaving. He had no intention of getting closer to them. Ash exclaimed that he should at least meet her little sister since their families were close. Rebecca Vale, the eldest daughter of the Vale family, told her younger sister not to throw away formalities. How could she speak like that to the son of a count? Jamie's eyes immediately glued to Rebecca, his expression changing. Noticing this, Ash asked him if he had fallen in love with her little sister. The boy's name came out of his mouth, and he couldn't understand how she had ended up here. Jane was the love of his life, given to the gods for her own good. And it is from this moment that the story of Diablo Wolfer, devoid of emotions, begins. Rebecca, hearing the boy, asked him who it was. Ash, noticing the strange tension, wondered if he had really fallen in love with her. But then, out of nowhere, Alf appeared with an evil grin. He used the artifact, from which tongues of flame began to burst out, shouting that he would make him his servant. Rebecca immediately rushed to her sister Ash to save her. A cold voice spoke softly, telling him not to disturb him, and the flames disappeared in the blink of an eye. Alf thought that the Phoenix Ring, an artifact that was created by his father, was not something that such a small fry would be able to block. Infuriated, Jamie raised his hand to cast a spell that would kill the boy. Immediately, ice appeared on the body of Count Simon's son and began to cover everything. But then a hand appeared before Jamie's eyes, and a deep voice told him that it was enough. As it turned out, it was Argento, and his touch and voice brought the boy out of his murderous state. Rebecca held her sister tightly as the man told his son that everyone was okay. With the use of great strength, Jamie fell into his father's strong arms as the crowd fell into a tense silence. Argento couldn't believe that his son was actually going to kill this boy. At first, he thought he was mistaken. But this cannot be considered an ordinary mistake. If the Swordmaster had not managed to stop his son, Alf would be dead. Leiter silently thought that this was simply amazing. Alpha's magic may be weak and less than half of his. But if this artifact had worked, everyone present would have burned alive. However, Jamie was able to figure it out in a second. The man thought that this child would definitely be able to fulfill his long-standing dream. Having picked up her son, Countess Simon began to shout to her husband that this child almost killed her son. How could he stand so calmly? An enraged Sire turned to the Countess, telling her to express herself correctly. The only one who tried to kill was Alf. She noticed that he attacked Jamie first and used the artifact towards him. Now this dangerous artifact lay on the floor, broken into pieces. Countess Welton asked the woman if she was right in this. In an attempt to protect her son, Countess Simon began to scream that everything was completely wrong. But Sire interrupted the woman, asking her what her son wanted to do then. Unable to bear it, the woman began to scream for her to answer her question. Argento, lifting his son, tried to calm his wife. Countess Simon simply sat on the floor with her son in her arms, while all eyes in the hall were glued to her. She could not say anything, and in her thoughts she helplessly prayed for help. She was brought out of her thoughts by her husband, who walked slowly to block them with his body. Filled with hope, the woman smiled, deciding that her husband might not be strict, but he would definitely stand up for his child. But to her misfortune, Lichter began to apologize for the way their son had behaved rudely on such an important day. He offered his sincere apologies to Madame Welton, which only further angered the already furious mother. However, as the crowd watched them, Sire could no longer be angry as the Count offered his sincere apologies. Having decided to end it all, the Countess thanked Count Simon for his sincere apologies and said that they would now go. Leiter did not stop them. Looking at Count Welton with his son in his arms, he noted that he too should rest. In a loud voice, Count Simon apologized to all the guests for ruining the evening. He asked them to return to their chambers and have a good rest. The ball was over. Discussing everything that had happened, the guests began to leave the hall, and Countess Simon remained sitting on the floor with her son in her arms. In a weak, trembling voice, she asked her husband why he was doing this to his son. Tears streamed down her cheeks and she couldn't help but scream to remind him that Alf was their son. She started screaming about how their dear son had suffered at the hands of this shameless bastard. But Lichter looked sternly at his wife and ordered her to shut up. He told her that there were too many extra ears here. She should return to her place with Alf. The Countess could not believe her ears. As the night wore on, the argument about this continued. The Countess screamed, asking her husband how he could do this. Even if their son was guilty, he should have taken his side. Ignoring his wife's cries, Lichter will turn to Alf, asking him if he was trying to get his attention like that. When there was no answer, which angered the man even more, he ordered him to speak in a firm, stern voice. Alf, shaking with fear, listened to his father ask him if he really didn't think that his actions would ruin his reputation in the eyes of the Eastern nobles and the entire kingdom. Tears streamed down the boy's cheeks as he helplessly thought that he just wanted his father to notice him. In an attempt to justify himself, the boy exclaimed that this brat had been rude to him, so he didn't know what else to do. Not even wanting to listen to these pathetic excuses, Lichter asked his son where he got the phoenix ring. A new wave of fear washed over Alpha, making him hesitate to answer, but he also didn't want to reveal his brother. Looking at his son with a murderous gaze, the magician quietly but firmly told him that he knew that he did not like to repeat himself. Alf had no choice but to submit and admit that Lennon had given him this artifact. A few minutes later, Lennon appeared at the door of the living room and asked his father if he had called him. Looking at his older brother, he thought gloomily that he was so pathetic. After all the conditions had been created for him. But he still failed. He couldn't believe that such a weakling as Alf was his older brother. Deciding to play dumb, Lennon smiled and asked his father why he had called him to his office. Lichter immediately asked his youngest son whether he had given his brother the phoenix ring, and he answered honestly, without hiding anything. The man asked the boy why he had given him something so dangerous. Pretending to be innocent, Lennon began to talk about how these little brats had bullied his older brother, and he didn't want him to suffer. But Lichter, not falling for it, interrupted him, saying that he simply wanted to manipulate him, which made the boy shudder. Lennon was confused as to how his father had figured all this out. Alf froze when he heard this. He couldn't believe that his brother had used and manipulated him. Looking at his sons one by one, Lichter calmly said that they had long ago realized that he was not at all interested in them. His voice rang out in the quiet room as he asked them if they wanted to know why. And he immediately replied that despite the fact that his blood flows in their strength, they lack talent. However, this does not mean that he is unaware of their thoughts. In a menacing tone, Lichter told them that if they were so eager to get his attention, then they shouldn't waste their energy on such tricks. She told them that instead they had better prove themselves worthy of his blood. Walking up to the door and reaching for the handle, he said that no matter what they thought, he wouldn't interfere anymore. But they needed to sort out this mess. Opening the door, he ordered his sons to ask Jamie Welton for forgiveness at dawn. Before leaving, Lichter told them that they would do this as many times as he could until he forgave them. Just the thought of having to meet that bastard again made Alpha shake. He asked his younger brother if he would go and apologize. Noticing that his brother was silent, the boy assumed that his father's words made him feel bad. But it was the other way around. His father's words that they had to prove themselves worthy of his blood only instilled in Lennon the determination to do so. Meanwhile, Siri stood by the bed where her dear son Jamie was sleeping peacefully. She thought about how his son's bloodlust towards Alpha was no joke. What could have happened to a 9-year-old to lead to this? She thought they were just fooling around, but if the artifact had worked as it should, her son would have died. The Countess could not forgive this even after Count Simon's apology. She needed a better apology or even compensation, and for this she was ready to turn to her family. Sirius was brought out of his thoughts by Jamie, who turned onto his side, tangling himself in the blanket. The woman covered her face with her hands, wondering what she had just been thinking about. Suddenly feeling a hand on her shoulder, Siri opened her face and forced her husband to ask her if everything was okay. After a moment's hesitation, she leaned against her husband's chest and asked him what must be wrong with her. Argento asked her what he could do for her. He would do whatever she wanted. Smiling, Siri noticed that he had stopped her then. The man said that he was just worried that she would only ruin her mood even more. Sighing, the woman said that Count Simon had immediately apologized politely. She did not want to create a conflict among the Eastern nobles over such nonsense. She exclaimed more joyfully that this boy had also gotten it in the neck, and the swordmaster agreed with her that he had indeed been quite scared. Argento took his wife away so they could take a break from everything that happened today. As it turned out, Jamie was not sleeping. He understood his parents' anxiety. He could not control himself at that moment. However, he could not even imagine that Jane would suddenly be reborn. Although this is not so strange since he was reborn after several tens of thousands of years. It's impossible that it wasn't her. But she didn't recognize Diablo in Jamie's body, meaning she has no memories from her past life. But that was okay, because Jamie was a special case. But nevertheless, he was worried about the very fact of her rebirth at the same time as him. Is this some kind of joke of fate, or is this someone's plan? Jamie immediately began to wonder if the 12 gods had really been named after her. But Blackie immediately hit him in the cheek, as if distracting his master from these dark thoughts. This really made the boy calm down and decide that this was nonsense, because if they found out about this, he would not have a peaceful life. Jamie began to stretch Blackie, trying to calm down and get his thoughts in order. But still, before his eyes stood an unbearable picture, a memory of Jane dying and lying in a pool of her own blood. This still made him feel sad, and first he decided that he needed to meet Jane again. Meanwhile, the man in the black cloak, tying a small note to the dove's leg, said that great changes were coming in the world of magic. This note stated that the eldest son of the Welton family, Jamie Welton, 3 years old, presumably a wizard of at least the 4th rank, an incredibly talented magician appeared in this world. The man waved his hands and released many white doves with notes into the sky. The next day, Jamie was walking through the woods that were on the grounds of the Simon family estate. Chernish, who was sitting on his owner's shoulder, squeaked, admiring the fresh air. Jamie, who didn't share the same enthusiasm, asked him if he needed fresh air at all. Chernish squeaked in irritation, which made the boy laugh. He still admitted that it was so quiet and pleasant here, most likely because most of the people had already left since today was the last day. However, before Jamie returns home too, he needs to meet her. But then he felt something and heard something, like drops of rain hitting the ground. The boy's gaze began to dart around, trying to understand where the sound was coming from. Since he couldn't figure it out, Jamie decided to use mana and found the source in the blink of an eye. Without thinking for a second, he ran there, and at that place he discovered Rebecca, who was sitting on the riverbank with some kind of creature next to her. Jamie immediately recognized the creature as a water spirit Undine. Undine immediately noticed the stranger, which made Rebecca look behind her. The girl immediately jumped to her feet and bowed politely to the boy, asking him if he was okay. Jamie replied that everything was fine, but his tongue began to slur when he asked her name. Laughing, the girl introduced herself again, saying that her name was Rebecca Vallee. The magician, looking at the girl, thought that they were both summoners of water spirits. Jane's voice flashed through his head, asking him not to forget him. Rebecca asked Jamie why he had such a sad face. When there was no answer, the girl decided that the young gentleman had not yet recovered from yesterday's events. Deciding to help him, the Viscount's daughter approached him and hugged him, saying that everything would be fine. Jamie didn't push her away, but he thought that this feeling was just a remnant of feelings from his past. But he still decided to enjoy it. The boys sat down on the grass together. The girl asked the boy if he was okay now, to which he replied that he was better. Smiling brightly, Rebecca said her father taught her that hardships are easier to bear if you share them with someone. Jamie asked again, deciding to check if she was talking about Viscount Vallee. The girl enthusiastically agreed and said that she was very glad to have the opportunity to talk today, since they were unable to do so yesterday. The magician replied that the same thought had occurred to him. The young summoner continued to smile and asked if he was telling the truth, to which Jamie nodded his head and thought that this girl was a completely different person. Perhaps it was for the best. Changing the subject, he said that he heard that the Vallee family had a tradition of making a contract with the spirits of the air, to which Rebecca replied that she had wanted to, but it hadn't worked out. Because of her strong connection with the spirits, the air spirits would come, but immediately refused to enter into a contract and leave. However, another day Undine came to her and said that it was her destiny to sign a contract with her. The girl said that it was an important decision and should have been discussed with her father first, but she accidentally signed a contract with him right then and there. This story gave Jamie the idea that the Spirit King should definitely know whether Jane had been reincarnated or not. The contract with the Spirit King that Jane had was different from others. It could be called a soul contract that connects lives, meaning that the Spirit King would immediately know if Jane was reincarnated. The magician asked the girl if her father had punished her for this, to which she replied that he was not angry but rather upset, as was she. Jamie remarked that it was something special in any case. He had never heard of an elemental appearing to someone on its own and offering contact. Smiling, Jamie told her what exactly the water elemental hadn't chosen. To the girl's surprise, he told her that she just needed to believe in herself. Rebecca smiled happily and thanked him for his words, which made her feel better. And then Jamie rose from the grass, thanked for today. He said that he had to go now. Before the girl had time to properly say goodbye to Jamie, he had already run away. The thought flashed through her head that she wanted to talk to him more, but the girl immediately became embarrassed, not understanding what kind of feelings these were. Having run a decent distance, Jamie thought about the fact that children don't talk like that. But Jane, that is, Rebecca, seems more mature to him, so it's difficult to talk to her like a child. Jamie returned to Count Simon's mansion in silence. He hadn't even had time to walk down the corridor when someone called out to him in a loud voice. It turned out it was Alf who flinched when Jamie looked at him, and Lennon was next to him. Jamie asked them what they wanted, but Alf was too busy answering to say anything. Gathering his pride into a fist, he loudly shouted out words of apology. This surprised Jamie, and he asked him what it was. Realizing that it was Count Simon who had forced his son to go apologize, the boy grinned. Looking at Lennon, he asked what this guy was doing here, to which Alf replied that it was his brother. Count Welton's son asked why he had brought him with him, whether it was too scary to go alone. But Lennon immediately said that it was he who had given his brother the artifact. The revelation that both brothers wanted to kill him angered the boy. Almost gritting his teeth in anger, he asked Lennon his name. With a slight smile on his lips, Lennon politely introduced himself, saying his name, and that he was the youngest son of Count Simon. Having assessed this younger brother, Jamie noticed that this boy was quite talented. He couldn't be compared with Alf, and apparently, he was also cunning. Coming closer to the boy, he thought that even such a son was not enough for Count Simon. Still beaming, Lennon said it was good that nothing terrible had happened and asked if they could go now that he had heard an apology. A vein swelled on Jamie's face from anger at being taken for a fool by this brat. Remembering yesterday evening, he noticed that the little one had not shown up there yesterday. To him, everyone except his father must be just pathetic trash under his feet. Jamie realized that if he let him get away with this behavior now, it could come back to haunt him. Sighing, the boy mockingly noted that it would be oh so difficult for Alf in the fight for the inheritance. Alf irritably asked him what the point of this was. Ignoring the elder, Jamie glanced at Lennon and asked him if he was speaking correctly, and the younger brother understood what he meant. Coming even closer to Lennon, the Earl of Welton's son remarked that in any case it was none of his business. Putting his hand on his shoulder, he said with an evil grin that since it was his doing, he should get his punishment. In a quiet voice, he asked his youngest son in his ear if he thought the same, and dark lightning was already shining around him. In a defensive tone, Lennon was about to ask what he was allowing himself to do, but then he noticed that the boy next to him had disappeared, like everything around him, and the space had darkened. Biting his lip in fear, he noticed that his body began to grow cold. With his legs shaking, Lennon fell to his knees, and a huge shining eye appeared in front of him, and a frightening voice was heard, telling him that this was his last chance. The darkness receded. Tears streamed down the boy's cheeks and drooled from his mouth as he trembled with fear. Lennon couldn't believe he had gotten out. The rational part of his mind told him it was all an illusion, but it was still difficult for the boy to bear it. He grabbed his head, bent down to the floor, and screamed hysterically. Looking up, Lennon knew only one thing. This was his last chance. He must fall on his face now, otherwise everything will be bad. Still shaking with fear, Lennon managed to squeeze out words of apology. After some time, carriages began to drive up to the entrance of the mansion, in which the aristocrats were leaving for home. Jamie couldn't help but be glad that he was finally going home. He thought that it was so annoying to enter somewhere. It would be better to be squeezed by his mother and stay at home. Having caught himself thinking this, the magician quickly stopped himself, not understanding how he could think like that. Count Simon suddenly approached him and remarked that he seemed to be in a good mood today. The boy replied with a smile that this was not true. He was just glad to be returning home soon. Lichter smiled back and said he was very sorry he never got the chance to talk to him. Jamie replied that he had hoped for the same, so he shared his feelings. The Count invited him to stay, but the boy immediately refused, saying that his desire to go home as soon as possible was much stronger, since he was exhausted. And regarding the reason, he said that the Count himself understands what the reason is. Lichter nodded and smiled again, saying that he understood everything perfectly. He told the boy that the magical world had begun to watch him, to which he replied that this was to be expected. Count Simon laughed and remarked that he apparently knew who he was. Jamie waved his hand and confidently replied that he knew everything perfectly well. Having decided to take a walk with the Count, he said that he had taught Lennon a lesson, to which the man replied that he had thought so, since his son had not been himself since yesterday. Jamie, somewhat worried, asked the Earl if he was angry about this. The Count asked, puzzled, why he should be angry if these were the consequences of their decisions. After these words, the young magician finally understood what was wrong with these brats. Jamie told the Earl that Lennon seemed quite talented, so it would be worthwhile to train him. Lichter disagreed, saying that he knew more about his abilities than anyone else, and that he was worth nothing. The boy irritably replied that it was still worth trying. and that if he tried hard, he could reach the same high level, but he would not be able to show his talent under such pressure. Unable to bear it any longer, Jamie accused the Count of making it all his fault. He exclaimed that these two brats became like this because he could not see their talent, although Alf is really ordinary. But Lennon has great potential. Lichter wondered if he had underestimated him, if his son really had a talent that he, an 8th-rank mage, hadn't been able to spot. But the child had. The man felt as if a great magician was standing in front of him. More calmly, Jamie told the Count that who knows, but perhaps by helping his son, he himself would be able to jump above his head. Before the man could answer, Ciri's voice rang out, telling Jamie that they were already leaving. Waving his hand to the Count, the cartoon ran to the carriage, exclaiming at the end that he should not convey the meaning of the words of a stupid child. Turning around, Lichter noticed that, as expected, it was unfortunate. Jamie reached home towards evening, and at night he went into the forest. After waiting a few minutes, the boy shouted to his slaves in the bushes to hurry up. Rise and Azard immediately jumped up in the bushes. Indignant, their master asked them where the hell they were. Coming closer, Rise said that Azard was idle. That's why they were late. The culprit had no choice but to apologize. Sighing, Jamie told them to hurry up and tell him what they had learned. Rise began his report by saying that the Zenith Church had been doing good work within Haze for some time, free of charge. By providing food and shelter to those in need, they have created a positive impression of themselves, and recently they have established their own orphanage. Jamie asked when the flask had started working, to which Rice replied that it had happened immediately after the gang had been defeated. 2 months ago, Count Welton completely destroyed the Level gang, and immediately after this incident, the Zenith Church officially began its activities. They came to the poor, served them, and preached the will of God. At first, civilians did not pay any attention to this. However, after the church's long-term activity, people began to depend on it and became believers again, resulting in the Zenith Church in Hayesa rising to an incredible height. Rise said that at the moment people worship the Zenith Church as the most generous and respected. Taken aback by this information, Jamie asked again. He swore quietly under his breath that this bastard Zenith would never do charity work. He shouted, asking his slaves if they believed that war and peace could coexist. The living dead looked at each other and shook their heads uncertainly. But Reese was quick to add that he believed they were connected. Jamie agreed grimly, saying that was what Zenith was all about. For him, the world is just the top of a hill strewn with corpses, and only in times of war does his divinity manifest itself. The magician said that therefore everything that the priests of Zenith do is contrary to his will. The boy was sure that there was definitely something hidden under this nobility, and so he ordered his servants to find out what it was. Meanwhile, the same boy who had bumped into Jamie back then, Ricky, was in the Zenith orphanage. When the employee praised him for his excellent cleaning job, he said that compared to begging and constant beatings, this was heaven. The minister told him that he had been through a lot, but now he had nothing to worry about. A month and a half has passed since Ricky arrived at the shelter. He is happy here. If it weren't for the shelter, his and his sister's lives would have been doomed. Ricky's sister, hearing the door open, asked if her brother had arrived. The boy happily replied that he was already back. Without opening her eyes, Anna turned her head towards the sound. Ricky's sister was blind. Knowing this fact, their parents abandoned them and ran away to protect his sister. Ricky had to do a lot of evil because living on the street is hard, and the adults were indifferent to them. In this hopeless life, when it seemed no one would help, the Genis Church was the first to extend a helping hand. This hand was God's, and then they were given a second chance. Now Ricky wanted to share this happiness that was given to him by God's grace and become a priest of God to spread the miracle. When the boy took his sister out for a walk, another child ran up to them, asking them if they had heard the news yet. And he himself already said that Shino received a divine blessing, and therefore, in order to become a priest, he will go to the main church next week. Not believing his ears, Ricky asked again, his eyes shining with admiration. Jamie flew home after meeting with Rice and Azard. Hovering in the sky, he told Chernish that they were almost there, so it was better to come down. As he slowly descended, the boy noticed that someone was lying on the ground. Dropping to the ground and moving closer to the man, the magician noticed that there was something strange about the guy's energy. As it turned out, he found this divine energy disgusting, so he immediately assumed that this man was a priest. Noticing the sword on the stranger's belt, the boy immediately realized that he was a high-ranking servant. But he still couldn't understand why the holy knight was suddenly lying on the road. Jamie sighed wearily and thought that this sounded like a problem. Stepping on the man's head, he wondered if he should finish him off right there. But suddenly, the man, who seemed to be unconscious, grabbed the boy's leg with a strong grip. The magician, who had not expected this at all, jerked back so much that even Chernish fell from his shoulder. Still holding the boy's leg tightly, the man looked up, revealing his pale face. He tried to say something, but his words were too quiet. But to the boy's surprise, with his last breath, this stranger asked for food. An irritated Jamie decided he would just leave the idiot to starve. The boy pulled his leg free and quickly walked away, followed by a loud rumbling from his stomach. A few hours later, well-rested, Jamie arrived for breakfast to find a surprise waiting for him. The surprise was not pleasant, but the boy tried his best to keep a smile on his face. And opposite the magician sat that same holy knight, joyfully eating food. The guy said that if it weren't for the Count's help, he would have died of hunger on the paving slabs. Argento replied that it was not his fault, but all thanks to the guards who brought him here. Russ replied that they were the Count's soldiers, so he should still thank them. Watching the stranger intently, Jamie wondered if he was too uncomfortable and why his mom and dad were so nice to him. The Count told the guest that he mentioned that he served in the church. Russ replied that this was true. He served Pyro, the goddess of mercy and punishment. In response to this, Argento told his wife that she was surprised for a long time when she heard about this, to which she replied that she was indeed surprised. The guest asked in confusion what was wrong. Sire asked the boy if he had heard of Bishop Saphira. Hearing this name, Russ asked if she was Madame from Afton. The Countess replied that she was from their Bell family. After these words, without further ado, the knight rose from the table. Falling on one knee, he expressed his greetings to the respected one. Jamie didn't understand what was going on. He knew that Pyro's church was located in Afton, where Bell's family was. But the one in front of whom the knight would behave like this had to be of at least the rank of a bishop. Having decided to find out about this, the boy called his father. Putting on a sweet face and hating every second of this behavior, he asked why this man was greeting his mother in such a manner. But to the boy's disappointment, Argento replied that it was a long story, so perhaps he would tell it another time. Jamie was upset that such humiliation was in vain. Sarah told her brother that he was sweet. The boy thought that if Bell's family had such shady connections with the Church of Pyro, it could be a pain in the ass. And all because she is the one whom he will one day have to kill. Moving into the office, Argento asked the knight how he ended up there, since, as far as he knew, the Church of Pyro did not conduct business in the eastern region. He asked him if he was here to expand his influence. Russ immediately waved his hands, replying that it was not like that at all. He just followed someone and somehow ended up here. Then the Count asked who he was pursuing, to which the boy replied that he was pursuing someone who was engaged in unthinkable experiments that no one should conduct, namely the creator of chimeras. The swordmaster immediately became alarmed and began to ask who this creator of chimeras in Haze was. Russ apologized and said that the rest of the information was so secret that even within the church not everyone knew about it. He could not tell anyone about it. But one way or another he could share it with the Count if he listened to his request and they entered into a contract. Argento asked him if he was asking for his help. The Holy Knight replied that he was sure that if the Swordmaster helped him, it would greatly help the matter. A chimera is a creature whose outer body is created from different creatures, but their creators are treated worse than ordinary criminals, and all because the basis of the chimera is a person. Perhaps there are those who do not use people to create them, but history knows of no such precedents. The Count replied that he did not promise full support, but since he knew about the relationship of his relatives with the Church of Pyro, he could not turn a blind eye to it. Hearing this, Russ immediately beamed with joy, realizing that he would be helped. Argento confirmed his thoughts, confidently stating that he would do everything to help. The knight jumped up with thanks. The man told him to finish with the pleasantries and asked why the church was persecuting the creator of chimeras. Why not ask the kingdom for help? Russ hesitated a little before replying that he was sure the kingdom would help them, but they couldn't ask for help. After all, in such a case the authority of the church is greatly devoured. And all because the creator of chimeras, who is being pursued by the church, has already kidnapped more than 10 knights of the goddess. Argento immediately realized that this meant that this creator of chimeras had created beings that used divine powers. As the day went on, Jamie went into the rose garden, walking quickly. He thought irritably that he would never have thought that he would be looking forward to tea so much. Sire and Sarah were already there. The woman, noticing her son, told him to sit down quickly. The Countess noticed that her son had no expression on his face. He was just gloomily drinking his tea. She asked him what it was that he was so eager to know. Jamie asked her why that man bowed before her, but he was thinking about why some stranger would solemnly greet someone he was seeing for the first time. Circe smiled and noted that she knew he would ask that, and asked if he wanted to know how her family was connected to the Church of Pyro. She told her son that his great-grandfather, that is, his non-biological grandfather, whom he had never seen, was the savior of the Church of Pyro. Jamie expected anything but this. The woman continued by saying that in the past, when a very important thing they were keeping was stolen from the Pyro Church, her grandfather helped them. This event, in which the demon followers used the sacred relic but were unable to summon their master, was called the Portsmouth Garden Incident. It is said that Circe's grandfather died trying to stop the Demon King's summoning, after which the Pyro Church granted the Bell family the title of Archbishop and vowed that for the next 100 years, all heads of the family would be equal to the rank of bishop. Now Jamie understood why his mother looked sad. He wondered if she had been that close to his grandfather. He thought it was stupid for the church to make such a reward, but it was understandable, since it was their only relic. Laughing evilly, he decided that one day he would finish off Pyro, but first he would take full advantage of her. He was brought out of these evil thoughts by his mother's voice, who called him by name. Putting on his usual sweet smile, Jamie turned to his mother and asked for more tea. And so the tea party continued on a good note. The gazebo was filled with conversation and laughter. As the night approached, it was time to send Shino away from the shelter that Genis had chosen. One of the priests said that they all blessed his upcoming journey and asked everyone to raise their glasses to such a significant event. Shino, already dressed in a clerical robe, broke into a joyful smile. Everyone at the shelter congratulated him, and Ricky was the brightest of all, happy that his friend would finally be going to Mount Chongbon. The boy and his sister Anna went out to see Shino off on his way. Already sitting in the carriage, Shino said that the decision to go was sudden. He had already thought that they would not see each other. Ricky answered him that the priest said that he would also be sent soon, so he would not be there alone, so he should not cry from loneliness. The future priest assured his friend that he would not cry but would wait impatiently for them to come soon. The driver slammed the reins and the carriage moved off, leaving the boy's friends behind. Tears of joy welled up in Ricky's eyes, and he became even more filled with the desire to become a priest. After some time, the priest told Shino that they had already arrived. The boy was surprised that they had arrived so quickly. He looked out the window, wondering if they had already reached Mount Chongbon. The priest led the boy inside the dark house, while he thought that the cart could not have traveled that far. Shino hesitantly asked the man if this was the main branch of the church, Mount Chongbon. The priest did not answer him, but only told him to follow her. Shino didn't calm down. He began to look around nervously, saying that they were in the wrong place, but the man assured the boy that everything was fine. They reached a passage down that led to some kind of basement, and the priest said that they now needed to go here. Shino obediently followed the priest down, but still continued to express his fears that they were going the wrong way. Having gone down and looked around, the boy said in an even more shaky voice that this place was somehow strange. Peering through one of the open doors, he was startled by a blistered hand reaching out to him. Running up to the priest, he exclaimed that this place was strange. There was something scary in the room. The priest ignored the boy. They reached another room, and the man told the bishop that he had brought him. The bishop, the same man who had come to see Earl Welton, smiled at the boy. Rushing towards the bishop with tears in his eyes, Shino asked him if he was not here because he was chosen by God. Laughing, the man replied that he was, of course, the chosen one. The boy started shouting and asked why he was in such a scary place and not on Mount Chongbon. The bishop replied to the boy that it was because this was the place where they had achieved utopia, and he was already impatient to find out what such a pure and innocent child would become. He told someone to come in, and the door slowly opened, revealing someone strange with dark energy swirling around his body. Half the man's head was covered in blisters. He laughed creakingly, looked at the boy, and exclaimed that this time they had brought him a worthy experimental subject. Reaching out to the boy, who was unable to move due to fear, he told him that he would definitely become a beautiful chimera. On the lands of Count Welton, Haya, on Felbart Street, it was quiet, but the sellers were already working hard. Russ walked down this street, followed by Jamie. The knight exclaimed that he remembered this place. It was hard for him that night when he was dying of hunger. The reason Jamie was showing that idiot knight today was simple. This morning at tea, Russ told the Count that he wanted to go and see this city, to which the Earl and head of the family hospitably replied that then his son, Jamie, would show him everything. Russ, looking at the boy, thought that this child had very developed endurance and memory. He could take a place at least in the executive bodies, and maybe even higher. Now it was not surprising that the Count asked him to accompany him. With a smile on his face, the boy thanked Jamie from the bottom of his heart for giving him a good look around Hayes, to which the boy replied that he hadn't left the house for a long time, so he liked it too. The knight extended his hand to the earl's son and said that since they were finished, they should return. Jamie replied that he did not need to take his hand, but instead, he wanted to ask something. A little confused and sad, Russ replied that he could ask whatever he wanted. The young magician asked the knight about what he had talked about with his father yesterday. The knight was surprised by the question because he was expecting something along the lines of, "Is it cool to be a knight?" Trying to get out of it, he replied that they were talking about how handsome Jamie was and what a handsome man he would be when he grew up. But the boy, seeing through his lie, told him not to lie. Russ, who thought this would work, nervously tried to continue to push this line. Jamie exclaimed irritably that if he wanted to tell him, he should have just said so, because even children wouldn't believe such nonsense. Russ apologized for lying and said it was just between adults. Looking behind him, Jamie thought that something was definitely going on in Hayes, so he asked to show him the city, but what was it? While the boy was thinking about this, Russ, worried, asked him if he was angry. Without answering, the magician said that he forgot to show one more place, and then the knight decided that the boy was definitely offended. But he still asked what kind of place this was. With a sly smile, Jamie replied that he absolutely had to see the Church of Genis in Hayes. Having got into the carriage, they quickly sped along the stone roads to the church. Russ kept trying to find out if Jamie was mad at him when he said they were already there. Meanwhile, Ricky was busy cleaning the church grounds, humming a tune. Hearing voices, he noticed a familiar face and a man walking behind him, happily looking at the church. Pointing his finger at Jamie, he unceremoniously shouted at him that he was that black-haired boy. The knight, noticing that someone was looking at his companion, asked him if it was really his friend. Looking to the side, the magician couldn't believe that he had suddenly met the boy who had crashed into him. Sighing tiredly that even changing his hair didn't help, he turned away and said that he was seeing him for the first time. Ricky shouted irritably, asking why he was acting as if they didn't know each other. Meanwhile, a carriage was driving along the road in front of the church. The boy, not paying any attention to her, quickly ran to his friend, asking him if he had dyed his hair. He barely recognized him. When there was no answer, he shouted, asking why he was pretending. When suddenly a loud knock of a wheel was heard near the boy. The driver of a fast-moving carriage shouted to the boy to get on the road quickly. But Ricky instead froze in place with fear, the horses rising on their hind legs, towering over the boy. Russ, seeing this, immediately rushed forward to push the boy out of the way. Realizing that he would not have time to escape, Ricky burst into tears, and in a barely audible voice he asked if he was really going to die like this. Jamie clicked his tongue in irritation, but his eyes lit up as they did whenever he used magic. He stretched out his hands and used the chain field spell, causing numerous magic chains to burst out from the magic circle. Russ quickly grabbed Ricky, carrying him away, and the chains headed in the opposite direction from him. The magic chains pulled tight and stopped the horses in the carriage. Ricky, having found himself on the brink of death, was still in shock. He couldn't believe that he was still alive. He immediately rushed to his savior and hugged him tightly, even too tightly. Jamie began to tell the boy to get off of him in an irritated tone, while Russ watched them. The magic Jamie had just used to save the child was far more powerful than any he had ever seen. The guy was surprised at how strong Jamie already was at 9 years old. This kid is definitely a genius. Not even in 10 years, but less. He will definitely be so powerful that Russ will not even dare to look him in the eyes. He was brought out of these thoughts by Jamie's question, which had made him stop dead in his tracks. The tour was continuing, and the knight asked where they were going. Sighing, the boy replied that they were going to Genis's church. Russ smiled awkwardly, trying to convince himself that he was just overreacting and that Jamie wasn't looking down on him. Ricky led the guests, happily telling them that he knew Genis's church like the back of his hand, so he would show them everything. He exclaimed with a smile that this was an orphanage where children lived who, like him, had nowhere to live. Suddenly, an elderly nun appeared and asked the boy where he had been. Looking at Russ and Jamie, she asked Ricky who these people were. The boy said that these people were his saviors. They stopped the carriage that was flying straight at him. The nun worriedly asked the boy if he was okay, if he was scared. With her palms folded in a prayerful gesture, she thanked the guests for Ricky's escape from a terrible fate. Russ replied that it was nothing, that this was what any servant of Pyro had to do. The woman's attention was immediately caught by the name of the goddess. The knight, pointing to lectures, said that this little one had made a much greater contribution, making him think that it was unnecessary. The nun looked at the boy, as if trying to understand who he was, and the boy immediately told her that he was the son of the ruler of these lands. The woman smiled wryly, saying that she should have recognized him immediately when she saw his emerald hair. But she was apparently so shocked by what had happened. These words made the boy tense up, because everyone born here really recognizes him only by the color of his hair. But even if we don't take this fact into account, why was she so worried? Was she hiding something? The nun asked if they had come here to bring Ricky home, to which Russ replied that he had come here because he had heard that the Church of Genis had shown up here this year. The woman asked the guest to follow her, and Ricky to give the young gentleman a tour. Noticing that they were trying to undress, Jamie frowned, wondering if this nun was going to hurt Russ. He didn't resist, just told Russ not to forget that he was having dinner with his parents that evening. Realizing that Jamie was so eager to protect him, the knight smiled and waved back. Ricky began his tour, but his voice sounded hesitant as he began to speak respectfully to the young master. The young magician told him to drop the formalities because it was ridiculous. To the boy's surprise, he said that he did not care about these formalities, so he could talk to him as before. Pleased by this, Ricky asked again. Jamie exclaimed irritably that he shouldn't make him repeat it. The magician could not understand why the boy was so happy, but he already ran forward, joyfully shouting that he would show him everything. After some time, the boy showed everything and finally brought the young gentleman to his room. Throwing open the door, Ricky shouted to his sister that he had brought a friend. An irritated Jamie wondered who had said that they were friends. The girl immediately jumped up from her seat and ran towards her brother. As soon as Jamie's gaze fell on Anna, he immediately tensed up because he noticed something about her. Taking his sister's hand, Ricky told her to say hello. Jamie is an amazing person. Noticing the young gentleman's strange look, the boy asked him what was wrong. Jamie couldn't take his eyes off the girl, who had a holy essence hidden within her, and her eyes were especially filled with holy power. God's representatives on earth are the servants of the Lord, endowed with his authority more than any other person, and they can also use it freely. At birth, one of their body parts has a huge accumulation of holy power, and this girl Anna was blinded by the powerful holy power. But the moment she awakens, all the true streams of this world will be revealed to her divine eyes. There was a high chance she could cause problems for Jamie in the future, so he wondered if he should kill her now. But he immediately dismissed this idea, because if he was able to find out her essence, then a high-ranking priest also knows about it. Killing her is much more dangerous. Jamie was brought out of his thoughts by Ricky's voice, who said that he understood everything. But to the magician's relief, the boy only asked him if he had fallen in love with his sister. Ricky was about to continue chatting, but Anna stopped her brother by hitting him on the head with a book and saying that she just wanted to ask something. In an innocent voice, she asked her brother if he could help her with something she didn't understand in the book. Ricky sat down on the bed to help his sister, while Jamie tried to figure out whose divine power was contained within her. Either way, it didn't really matter whose it was, he still had to keep an eye on these guys. Deciding that this was the right moment to leave, the magician headed for the door. Noticing this, Ricky asked him if he had gone to the restroom, to which he replied that he was already leaving. Without interfering, the boy volunteered to accompany him to the exit. On the way out, Ricky asked the young gentleman if he would come to visit again. Jamie didn't answer, but only asked if there was anyone here that was keeping him coming back. The boy smiled and remarked that he liked the fact that he was interested in them in a friendly way, to which the Count's son replied that he was making it all up. Still, Ricky replied that at first it was enough for him to be near his sister, but after he came here, he changed his mind. He shared with a smile his dream of being chosen by Lord Genis and becoming a priest. The boy said that yesterday one of his friends from the orphanage was chosen and went to Mount Chongbon. When Jamie heard this, all the pieces of the puzzle, the church, human trafficking, Livel, and the chosen one, finally came together in his head. Suddenly he shouted, asking the boy where he had been before he came here, to which he replied, "On the street." The magician, continuing to shout, asked him where he had been before. Ricky answered hesitantly that he was a 6 in Lavale. These words were the final proof that all these events were somehow connected. Meanwhile, Russ's excursion had also already ended. The nun volunteered to escort the man to the young gentleman, for which he thanked her. As they walked, the knight thought that this servant was very silent, whether it was because she did not trust the priests of other churches, or perhaps they were somehow connected with the Chimera. Russ and the nun actually met the boys. The woman asked Ricky if he had given the young gentleman a tour, to which he nodded. A bishop emerged from around another corner, accompanied by a knight whose face was not visible. The man noticed that in his absence an important guest had arrived. After greeting Ricky briefly, he said it was an honor to meet the young master. Jamie greeted him politely, thinking that it all fit together. It was the Church of Genis that was kidnapping children. The bishop asked Russ who he would be, to which he replied that he was Russ Armetic, a minister of the Church of Pyro. Jamie thought that the purpose of the Church of Genis was definitely somehow connected to the reason for Russ's presence here, and the bishop apologized for being absent during their visit. Without listening to the men's dialogue, the boy noticed the strange energy emanating from the knight. The level of divine power that emanated from him indicated that he was a paladin. But the magician noticed that Russ was reacting strangely to him. Something was clearly wrong with this paladin. He frowned and looked at the bishop, and the man looked back and said nothing. Jamie and Russ walked back. The whole time the knight was unusually quiet. Looking back at the man, the boy told him that he had heard from Ricky that his friend had been chosen by God and then sent to the main church. He was envious and said that he also wanted to become a priest. Smiling his usual smile, Russ replied that Ricky was a great guy and that his dream would come true someday. Jamie realized that perhaps the slight hint had not been enough. Deciding to push the knight to think again, he asked him if he had heard anything from his father. He said that 2 months ago his father destroyed the Livel gang, and they apparently kidnapped and sold children. He said he remembered it because, according to Ricky, he was in this gang before the shelter. From the knight's expression, Jamie decided that he understood, but still decided to give one more hint. In a casual tone, he noted that it seemed that Genesis Church spent a lot on charity. Russ finally remembered that Genesis Church had never done any charity work, which meant they could build an orphanage to use the children as material. Returning to the Welton mansion, the knight immediately hurried to the Count to tell him everything. He told him that it looked like that kid Ricky used to work for the Livel gang. Argento said he only watched their church because they were having a positive impact on his land. Russ said that when he and Jamie were leaving, they met a priest and a paladin, but there was something he couldn't understand. A powerful divine power could be felt from him, but it was impossible to determine whether this paladin served Genis. Knight Pyro said that he felt as if the divine power was mixed with something else. Understanding the thought, the Swordmaster asked if the paladin was a chimera that could use divine powers. The Count said that if this was true, then they could not sit idly by. He would send his knights immediately. Russ stopped him, saying that they needed to make sure first, and he solemnly promised that he would definitely find proof. Argino noted that it would be dangerous to do this alone, to which the boy replied that he was ready for the dangers. Then the Count asked him what the chances of success were. "I have no doubt," the knight replied that he had the advantage in this situation. With a wave of her hand, the Swordmaster told him that she would assign 3 of her men to him. And the very next moment, 3 figures in dark cloaks appeared behind Russ. The knight turned around in surprise, as he had not felt their presence before. Argino explained that these were knights who protected the Welton family from the shadows. They were professionals, so they would be useful. But Russ thought that although these guys wielded long swords, judging by their appearance and stealth, they were assassins. The guy still decided to ask if these guys were really knights, to which the Count replied that they were knights now. Having thanked him for his help, the knight said that he would definitely reveal the true intentions of the priests of Genis. Meanwhile, something flew past Argento's office window. As it turned out, it was Chernish, who soon returned to the owner and told him everything. Jamie noticed that it was all quite evil. Taking pure children for such a purpose is a good plan. But do gods engage in such things? However, Genis, it seems, remains the same scum he was before. Falling onto the bed, he reasoned that in any case, the fact that they weren't perfectly prepared meant that they were in a hurry for some reason. The boy turned to his pet, causing it to squeak questioningly. Handing his pet a letter, Jamie told him to go to Rise. Chernish immediately grabbed the letter with his little teeth and flew out the window. The boy said that it was time for him to start preparing too, because the coming battles would require magic of the highest level. And he used the subconscious technique, which allowed him to use magic by first imprinting the spells and mana control into his mind. In the silence of the night, Azard asked Rise how much longer they had to stand there. The man replied that as long as they take effect. Another impatiently replied that not even a mouse was scurrying around here, let alone suspicious knights. Rise said all they had to do was follow orders. Azar did not deny this, but simply said that he was simply incredibly bored. And the very next moment, loud, heavy steps were heard on the wooden floor. Not expecting this, Rise immediately tensed up and turned to look at the named guest. The paladin who was in the shelter at the time pulled a sword from behind his back, saying only one word, "Kill." Rise shouted at his brother to dodge when he noticed the paladin lunge. Azard barely managed to dodge the stranger's incredibly powerful blow. The living dead recognized this as a divine force, but it was very harsh. The paladin shouted the same word louder and louder, and the wind rose around him. Rise turned to his brother and shouted at him to quickly inform the master. Azard immediately ran out of the house to send a message to the owner. Trying to stop the man, the paladin rushed at him, swinging his sword along the way. To protect his brother, Rise ran towards him to push him out the window. From the strong blow, Azard flew backwards into the window, breaking it. The blow of the paladin's sword landed on the one who remained in the room, cutting his stomach. A moment later, everything around glowed with purple light. It was the Dark Dimension spell. Jamie, stepping his foot onto the window frame, asked with a grin if they had called him. The boy said that now no one would know what was happening, because this spell was quite powerful. But still, 6th rank magic was still too difficult for him. With even greater insistence, the paladin rushed forward towards the new man. Jamie didn't lose his composure and began to use 6th rank magic, the gravity spell. This spell increased the force of gravity in a specific area and suppressed the target to the point where they could not move. Unable to withstand the pressure, the holy paladin fell to the floor. But the magician did not stop there and called upon the grip of death, which summoned the dead to hold the target. The slightly weakened paladin was still able to break these paths, repeating "kill" over and over again. Jamie then decided to use sacrifice, magic that sacrifices summoned souls, creating a huge explosion. The summoned souls gathered into a glowing ball, ready to explode at any second. However, even after such a blow, the paladin remained intact and was even ready to continue. Not without surprise, the magician realized that this paladin was at the expert level. Grabbing her sword again, the chimera ran forward, intending to kill everyone. Not at all frightened by such an attack, the magician said that he was strong in spirit, but had gotten involved with the wrong opponent. With a wave of his hands, he summoned the magical threads of the puppet spell. The threads wrapped around the paladin's body, subduing him. Under the pressure of the threads, the chimera had no choice but to fall to the floor. The paladin was unable to remove the restraints and analyze the danger. Coming closer, Jamie asked him if he was interested in what was happening to him. And he said that fragments of the dead people got into his body, creating an explosion. That's what happened. He told him that everything that belonged to him was now his. He could no longer do anything. Raising his head with difficulty, since he had almost no control over his body and it was impossible to use dark magic, he realized that there was no point in continuing the fight. And for him, the best solution against such an invincible enemy was to escape. Jamie's face twisted in surprise and fear as he realized that this paladin was about to self-destruct. He immediately jumped up to stop it. In the blink of an eye, he extended his hand, casting the Hand of Darkness spell on it. Moving closer, he reached into the chimera's chest with his enchanted hand to stop the magical explosion. But after just a few moments, he realized that he wouldn't be able to stop it. Meanwhile, the magic inside the paladin was being released more and more while the boy's hand was still inside him. Jamie froze in place, realizing he could neither prevent it nor dodge it. In that moment, he made the decision to run, and, pushing away from the paladin, he pulled out his hand. Immediately after this, an explosion thundered, filling the entire room with light. Thanks to Blackie, who protected his master, Jamie was able to survive, and he could not imagine that this paladin could escape from his dark dimension by releasing all his holy energy. But the boy was not going to let him go so easily, and he ordered Chernish to stroke the light. The chimera ran away as fast as he could, and instead of kill, he now repeated, escape. Jamie clasped his hands together and yelled at him to slow down. A magical beam hit the paladin's back, piercing his armor. The whether his breastplate was destroyed, tentacles with a mouth with sharp teeth burst out. As it turned out, the true nature of the chimera was finally revealed. Determined to catch the chimera at any cost, Jamie used the Chain Field spell. The chains quickly reached the chimera, wrapping around his chest and stopping him. Jamie uttered the word "get lost" and threw a bright beam of light at his opponent. Now the blow passed completely through the chimera's chest. Not stopping there, Jamie clapped his hands, using the Death Blast. There was a loud sound, and immediately after that a fountain of blood burst out of the paladin's chest. The chimera's physical shell was in critical condition. It could not move. Suddenly, something quickly flew out of the mouth with teeth on the paladin's back. Jamie wondered if what had flown out was the chimera's true form. But, unfortunately, the chimera's true form quickly ran out the window. When the boy looked out the window, the chimera had already disappeared without a trace. Rise ran excitedly towards his master. He told him that he had done well and asked what had happened to the creature, to which he replied that he had lost it. Surprised by the gentleman's calm, the dead man asked him if they didn't urgently need to track it down and catch up with it. But Jamie replied that it didn't matter. Rise couldn't understand why the escaped enemy wasn't important now. He thought they were waiting for him to be captured. The man politely asked the owner to explain his motives. The boy briefly replied that traces of black mana were not so easy to erase. The moment the Hand of Darkness pierced through him, the creature was completely filled with his black mana, which meant Jamie could easily track it. Meanwhile, the bishop was busy with paperwork in his office. Suddenly, he noticed a small, strange creature with many eyes climbing into his window. The man couldn't believe that the chimera, the basis of the research, the knight who was filled with holy energy, was destroyed. Rise expressed his concerns that then the enemies would be able to track down the owner. Jamie reassured him, saying they wouldn't be able to find out. He explained that his current powers were completely different from black magic, but still, he couldn't understand why black magic was weak against holy magic. He said that from the very beginning his magic was created to kill gods. God slaying is a magic spell created to kill sacred creatures, also completely erasing their existence, leaving no trace. So no matter how hard those holy magic-using assholes try to track him down, they'll never be able to do it. After sending the Chimera's physical body into the portal, Jamie once again told Rise not to worry. At that very moment, Azard burst into the room, asking his brother if he was safe. Noticing the owner, he smiled, delighted by his arrival. The man said that he thought that the knight would turn his brother into a pile of bones, but the owner took care of everything. The magician agreed that it was all his merit, and asked him where he had been. Azard said that he had previously lost consciousness after falling out of a window, and that when he came to, he immediately came here. Jamie asked about how the zombie had passed out while Rice pretended he had nothing to do with it. Enraged, he ordered Azard to stand with his head on the floor. Mounting his slave, he canceled the order to follow them, as they had been spotted too quickly and would be caught if they simply stared at their enemies. Rise nodded, not disputing the instructions. With a wave of his hand, Jamie cast a spell that began to heal Rise's wounds. The magician said that it was not difficult for him to patch them up, but he still had to be careful with his body. The boy got off the other man, who remained standing face down on the floor, and the owner told him not to leave Rise anymore and to guard him. Stepping onto the window frame, he said over his shoulder that it was time for him to go, that they should also go back and be careful. The boy jumped out of the window, and Chernish's black wings immediately appeared behind his back. Meanwhile, the bishop was indignant that their chimera had suffered. He couldn't believe that their expert-level paladin chimera, created from 4 life forms, had been turned into this. Now the remains of the chimera were placed in a small jar. The man wondered if Count Welton could have done this, but he immediately realized that if it had been the Count, the main body of the chimera would not have survived. Moreover, the connection between the paladin and the bishop was severed in an instant. It was definitely tearing magic. You can't do that without a barrier. Starting to think about who could be a mage of such a level in their region, he began to think about the young master. But the man immediately dismissed this thought, because this boy was only rank 4, and to defeat the chimera you need at least rank 5. While thinking about increasing the speed of the experiment before it was too late, the bishop felt a sword at his throat and heard a voice asking him if his second plan had also failed. The girl behind the man said that, judging by his silence, she was right.